I would like us to introduce ourselves, please. I'm John Fink, Chair.
Rick Lyles.
John DeLeo, Vice Chair.
Molly Friedland, alternate one.
Actually, today you will be a voting member.
I understand.
So are you prepared emotionally for this?
Yep.
Good. Next item of business is adoption of the minutes of the September 1st meeting. Is there a motion regarding the
Move
minutes?
the minutes be accepted. Adopted, sorry.
Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor, please.
Aye.
Thank you. Now, the next item of business, revisions to an approved,
These are the extra minutes.
excuse me?
Extra minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot those. Yes, adoption of the minutes from the August 24th and September 28th site visits. Is there a motion regarding those minutes?
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please?
Aye.
Thank you. Now, revisions to an approved major use site development plan entitled Woodlawn Museum Visitor Center for Kathy Young, Executive Director. The proposal revises layout of the visitor center and reduces its square footage from 14,000 square feet to 10,672 square feet, relocates the parking areas, and reduces overall impervious surface on a 155 acre parcel located at 19 Black House Drive, tax map 26-1 and lot 57. The subject property is located in the neighborhood zoning district. Is someone representing the applicant, please?
My name's Alina Watt, and I work for Head of Fine Engineering, and I'm representing Woodlawn.
So go tell us about this, please.
Sure. Planning board approval was obtained for the construction of a new visitor center and associated utilities and parking back in January of 2019. And since that time, there's been a revision to the building layout and the parking layouts that are associated with it, affecting an overall reduction in impact to the site. The square footage of the building is reduced. The amount of impervious area on the site has been reduced as well as sewer and water demand calculations, just all stemming from shrinking the size of the building overall. So we're applying to amend the planning board approval with the new site layout.
Okay. Questions from the board?
I'll start. Tom, the previous approval and the access road, I believe, was 14 feet, and we granted a waiver to keep it at 14 feet, is that correct? Correct. But now, in a letter from you and some other places, are we getting back to a 20-foot road, or?
So the way we're looking at this project is basically right in front of the visitor center is where the actual construction is going to be, with the new road going out to the additional parking, which is 20 feet, which meets the requirements that we're asking for.
Okay, so basically, the new road will be 20 feet, they're not expanding the current road to 20 feet.
And we've coordinated with the fire department to determine that there's adequate water supply on site for fire protection, because that was one thing that was a condition of approval with the original planning board approval. And to meet that, we're proposing a 10,000 gallon underground storage tank cistern for fire protection that will be located on site. There is one shown on the plan. It's not the final location on the plan, but we'll coordinate that closely with the fire department.
Okay, that was gonna be one of my next questions, but where it was, because I couldn't find it, so.
So we started off, we had a couple areas where we wanted to put it and it wouldn't work due to historical pieces on the property. So what I did in my letter was to say on the final milars, it will show the actual final location of where it's gonna be, but it will have a 10,000 gallon cistern in lieu of a actual sprinkler system in this building.
In addition to.
Okay. So there's still gonna be a sprinkler system?
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, does the cistern feed the sprinkler system?
No, so we're gonna have, there's a hydrant right there on site, right on top of the hill, that's gonna feed the sprinkler system. The cistern's gonna be able to help us supplement with fighting fire on its own.
Okay, would it be advisable, would it be smart to put the cistern someplace where, close to the water line, so the water line would, if you're using the cistern to pump water out of it, would it make sense to have a water line connect to it?
Nope. So it basically, they're gonna use 2.5-inch hose, and we're gonna fill off the hydrant to fill the cistern in itself, and it'll be monitored by the maintenance personnel on site to ensure that the water is at the correct levels, and then if not, the fire department's gonna use part of it as a training exercise to, pump from the hydrant up into it, and if it depletes over the years, then, similar cases probably will happen.
I was thinking more in the, like, if you're fighting a fire.
So the hydrant up there cannot sustain 2 operations at once.
Okay. I know that was basically why we're here.
Yeah.
And why it's taken so long. I guess I got a little bit of a question on a revision to a revision on, for the wastewater and water. I mean, it's gone from previously 2274 gallons per day to 1787, and then it went down at, I don't see that sheet printed until like 527.
Yep. So the reason for that is, I spoke with Mike Harris last week actually, and the reason that it was such a high demand originally calculated was because the city felt that, or the wastewater department felt that the public restrooms, they were considered a public restroom use, which had a very high sewer demand. In talking with Mike, he kind of reevaluated his stance on that because the restrooms there really will be only used by people visiting the Woodlawn sites, hiking the trails, in the event center, things like that. It's not like a rest area where people from the public are pulling in, using the bathroom and leaving. So he recommended that we use event center, an assembly occupancy classification and an exhibition hall classification for the museum areas to recalculate the sewer demands. So the reason for that vast reduction down is because of that reclassification. There was a minor reduction just based on the square footage of the building, but it was really that reclassification that really dropped it that dramatically.
Like what was the original capacity for events versus what it is now, the new proposal?
So I don't know if I have the original, I might.
Would you say that drop in usage was more because they used a different
A
classification?
different classification.
Because it just seemed like it was a huge drop for, maybe a 20% drop in the,
Sure, yeah.
the capacity.
Yeah, so that drop is not really based on the original large capacity that was calculated was based on a public restroom usage.
Yeah.
And by changing it to just an assembly occupancy usage, it really dramatically dropped it right down, irregardless of what the size would be. If this was the original size building, it still would have been a dramatic drop if we had changed the classification.
And this is, I don't see anything from Mike Harris. So is he on board with these changes, Elena? And they say letters going to Mike.
Yeah, I suppose we still need a letter in response.
I sent, yep,
From him?
I don't think we haven't gotten a response from him, but, yeah. The only reason that we changed this was based on a conversation I had with him, and he knew that this was gonna dramatically reduce the gallons per day, and it was his actually recommendation in the first place to, he said you'll save some money in connection fees. This really isn't a public restroom, you can use this classification, and that's why we proceeded in that direction.
So I would suggest making his positive response a condition of approval, because that conversation between them did occur after the technical review team meeting.
I would also note that on the previous approval, we went ahead with the higher amount. The fact that it's lower now, I don't think affects this particular application, because we still have the higher approval on
True.
record. Okay. Just to make it easier on the motion.
Okay. I think that does it for me.
Tom, I'd like to go back to the road for a moment. The actual width of the road will now be how many feet?
So the new proposed road, the construction will be
Yeah.
20, and in some areas is a little bigger than 20. But the actual entrance from Surrey Road up in will remain the same and will not change up until about the visitor center where they will be doing construction and parking and adding parking lot.
When we gave the variance for that, did that variance cover from the street to the project?
Yep.
Now, you quote, in your letter, it says that the width is based on NFPA,
Yes.
which the planning board does not have the power to grant a waiver to.
So NFPA
There-
1 has underneath it in chapter 18 gives the AHJ the authority to reduce the width of the road if required or need be. And that's what we're going with, and I've spoken to Chief about this and he's in agreement.
Okay, I was concerned about that. Okay, that makes it neater. Any other questions? Comments?
No.
I'm disappointed.
Sorry.
Anyhow, this is a public hearing. Any member of the public may comment upon this matter. I ask that before you do so, you be recognized by the chair and then go up to the lectern and identify yourself and express your comments or concerns. Does anyone wish to speak? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and just note that yours is a very controversial project. So, what would the board like to do at this point?
Before we make a motion, may I make a request for,
Absolutely.
I mean, it receives approval, which kind of sounds like it is. I mean, I came across what I thought to be a problem in that when the board originally approved this was in March of 2018. The Mylar was not signed until January 2019. Our ordinance says that a project has to at least get a building permit within 36 months. But for whatever reason, we didn't sign the Mylar for an additional 10 months. So right now, it's kind of a gray area, and I discussed it with Elena, and she's had some conversation with Ed Vera, that did the 36 months expire based on the March 2018 approval? Or does the 36 months go from the January 19? So I would request that a new Mylar, which I assume will have to be given to the planning board to sign, not take 10 months
No,
to get before the board for signature.
it won't.
Thank you.
And maybe you could address the construction timeline to the extent you know what it might be?
I guess I'm not 100% sure what the construction timeline is.
Well, in the application, it says starting in March of the,
Yes, I'm
and
sorry.
complete by May 23, so that's a little reassuring.
And that was provided by John Gordon, architect, is also working on this project, so he would be more informed of that.
And if I could add one other thing.
Sure.
You might consider, the conversation about road width seems resolved, but there were a couple of waivers in regard to lighting that were part of the original approval,
Yeah.
so you might want to reaffirm.
So, the
Does it-
waivers,
Does the new building have more or fewer lights in the open?
the configuration is different,
Yeah.
so I don't have a fixture count on what was previously approved, but before the parking was arranged in a more compact way, so the lighting was arranged differently in order to meet the lighting ordinance. Now we have the parking a little bit more, kind of going up towards the, to the back of the site. So I don't know that the number of fixtures is going to be an adequate comparison, although we did provide a photometric plan that demonstrates that we meet the Ellsworth lighting ordinance for, I believe, a rural classification, which was the waiver.
Which
that
was the waiver.
Yeah.
I would suggest the waivers still stand. So, because I would prefer to focus on the changes. And since there's no greater lighting, I don't see that we need, I think it's my opinion. Anyone on the board wish to disagree with me so I can really dislike you? No.
Good.
I notice you're all quaking.
Literally.
Well, I hope not. So, is there a motion regarding this matter?
I will make a motion that we approve the revisions to a major use site development plan entitled Woodlawn Museum Visitor Center. The proposal revises layout of the visitor center and reduces its square footage from 14,000 square feet to 10,672 square feet. Relocates parking areas and reduces overall impervious surface on a 155-acre parcel located at 19 Black House Drive, tax map 26, lot 57. The subject property is located in the neighborhood zoning district. Any additions to that, Elena?
So, I think that the Cistern location has been, pretty much agreed upon and established from where it's been presented on here. A grease trap location based on the comments from the wastewater superintendent. I haven't seen a specific location for that, so I think with the final plans for signing, it would be good to depict those in the
Yep.
finalized
I
location.
recall seeing something about the grease trap being internal to the building.
He would like one outside of it, based on the kitchen equipment.
And the applicant is understanding that we can definitely show on the plan that we will install an external grease trap. Location may, be subject to building, where the plumbing ends up being, but we'll definitely show on the plans that one will be installed.
And where the cistern will be.
And the final location of the cistern with the fire department approval.
Is there a second to the motion, please?
So moved.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So maybe next time you come, if there is a next time, we can give you a harder time.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Next item of business is a preliminary plan for a major use site development entitled Ellsworth Renewables for Nexamp Solar LLC. The proposal is to construct a 5-megawatt large-scale solar energy system on a 94.6 acre parcel, tax map 37, lots 20 and 20-1, located on the Bucksport Road. The subject property is located in the rural and drinking water zoning districts. Is there someone representing the applicant, please?
Yes, I am, just set up the board here, I'm a little old school today, but the board and plans.
But so are we.
My name is Drew Garvin, I'm with Meridian Associates, representing the applicant Nexamp Solar, and Henry Barrett is here as well, representing Nexamp. We are proposing a 5-megawatt large-scale solar facility on a parcel off of Bucksport Road. It's a 95-acre parcel. There is a small existing gravel access road, dirt gravel access road coming into the site. We're enhancing and kind of relocating that. It crosses a wetland at the site entrance, a culverted wetland, and we are extending that access, 20-foot wide proposed gravel access road all the way throughout the site as shown on that plan there. The entrance is cut off, and that's on another sheet that I can show you if you'd like. But the access road cuts through the solar array field all the way to, that's not the back of the parcel, but it's probably about halfway through the parcel. And the drainage is, there's a grass swale system running alongside the proposed access road to capture and recharge the drainage. And for severe storms, it would get culverted under the access road and continue to flow down to the west part of the site where there is wetlands. And that's basically the short version of what's proposed here on site. Happy to take questions.
Don't worry, you'll have one. So, any comments, questions from the board?
The original option and ground lease was dated June 21st, 2020. I think maybe one for 6 months. Have these options been updated to show that you still have power to be here?
Yes, we've changed, working with NextAmp, we've changed the array, and actually, I believe that the tables themselves are probably a different version of what we showed originally.
Well, I think, I'm interested more in the lease that you have with Mr. Cistern, that you
Oh.
have
Yeah.
right title and interest to be representing this property to try and develop it.
Yeah,
So I think if you have an updated lease, you should get that to the city.
so within the lease, there's that initial option period,
Right.
and then that extends for another 2 years. There's the development construction period,
Okay,
which extends after that, which we're in right now.
okay,
So it's still under control within the lease agreement.
okay. Our in-house lawyer is not here tonight.
Okay,
He probably would be able to answer that question.
okay.
Now, several occasions, you said this was for 5.0 megawatts?
Yes.
I mean, what-
It might be 4.9 actually I think I rounded up, it might be 4.9.
Okay, but there's one memo,
5 megawatt.
to the city of Ellsworth, September 2021. It has to do with the decommissioning plan. And under the facility description, it says the proposed facility consists of approximately 6.8 megawatt.
That must be outdated, yeah.
Well, so that's in DC, direct current, so there's two different ways you can sort of evaluate the size of the project. And the 4.99 is in the AC, and then that's in the DC.
There was some, on the decommissioning bond, I guess I would ask staff, I mean, here it says that the decommissioning amount, the 95,320, which staff has said is a little bit low from what we've seen on other projects. But it says that the amount will be reviewed after 15 years from approval of the plan and at least every 5 years thereafter. If I'm not mistaken, I think in previous decommissioning bonds that Ed has reviewed, the review process is a lot less.
I
I
think,
honestly, it seems like some were on a yearly basis, but
so I think there's a couple things happening. I think probably the numbers you've referred to come from the state's requirements for decommissioning under state law. Whereas and we've discussed this a little bit before, but the financial institution providing this might want to look at the number on a yearly basis. And that's why we would see it more frequently.
I mean, I think that's something that has to be settled with Ed, where, I mean, he's reviewed all the decommissioning bonds, but I guess maybe we need to have a little discussion of why your decommissioning amount is so much less than other plans that we've approved. You know, are you doing something different in the decommissioning plan, or?
So, so in terms of the review period, the state recently did, the DEP has come up with a new application process for decommissioning, where their requirement is after 15 years, and then every 5 years after that, the cost is reviewed. So that's something that DEP has come up with as sort of a, overall sort of baseline requirement. Our understanding is that cities and towns can still implement their own, but that the DEP is sort of there as a backstop as well. In terms of the cost, that's something that we've worked with DEP on other projects that they have approved that are similar size and scope to this. So we've, I think we've gotten like 5 or 6 projects of this size through the site law application process with DEP. And so they've reviewed our decommissioning plans and have approved that cost for similar size projects. It comes out to about 14,000 per megawatt DC, which is something they've reviewed and approved. So that's where we're coming up with that figure for this project.
I mean, I would expect the city and Ed to require you to that dollar amount be reviewed probably on a yearly basis. I mean, DEP is not gonna protect the taxpayers in Ellsworth. And this is why I feel it's very important for the city, for the bond company to review that. Whatever Ed has set up in the past, whether it be on a yearly basis, and every other year. And I think a lot of the other developers, I'm sorry I don't have I don't know whether it's New York State figures for decommissioning. I don't have the actual entity that does that, but it just seems like it's the cost is, I mean, Kerry put together a spreadsheet. I mean, this is about half the price of other solar farms of this size. And that's just a little concerning. I wouldn't mind to see some other figures on that, at the next meeting.
Okay.
I think that's all I have for questions.
Anyone else?
You mentioned that there's already an existing road, and is that from the landowner's previous use, or what was that from?
I believe it's just from logging, and it's only goes, it's literally cut off from there, or it might trickle up into that, let me go up and show you. It's not a big road.
So you'll be starting your road from the same places
Right,
where
the
current
access is
road-
important because it crosses that wetland there, that crossing, so that minimizes.
Yeah, there's a small, paved apron, just,
Right, yeah, a lip, just a quick lip off the road, and then there's this, I know you can't see from where you're sitting, but there's this gravel road, you can see we're off of it here, but it goes in the same spot, and there's this gravel road that kind of just comes up and ends like up here. And our road comes a lot further than that, but yeah, it's the crossing that's kind of critical and why we're maintaining that in the apron. So we are maintaining that, we're enhancing it, we're widening it. We have retaining walls next to it, and there's existing culverts connecting these two wetlands and also going across Bucksport Road. But one 36-inch pipe going across Bucksport Road. But yeah, so we're kind of enhancing that entrance to make it appropriate for vehicles.
And then you'll be replanting to form a buffer from the road?
Yeah, we have a planting plan for appropriate buffers and whatnot as well. Yes.
Let me just get back to the road. Have you been in contact with DOT as far as an entrance permit? Because this is a section of
Yes.
road that DOT is not inclined to give entrance permits.
Yes, yeah, that's in, we have been in communication with them and DEP with the appropriate permitting for each. I was just there before the meeting today. You know, it is an existing, that's another reason why I brought up the existing road, because it's an existing curb cut of sorts there. And there is a good amount of sight distance going both, it comes down the hill,
Yeah.
and it's kind of the low point of the hill, that's why it's a wetland in the crossing there. But, yeah.
Yeah, there's no issue with sight distance. I'm more worried about that DOT.
Yes.
In that section, we
We've
had another
begun that
development that
process.
they said, no.
Yeah, we've begun that process, so,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. But you don't know for sure whether DOT.
We don't have it approved yet,
Yeah.
no.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would assume, though, if they said no, it kind of cancels everything.
We'll have to figure something out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
That would be a deal breaker.
Yeah.
yeah, that'll be tough.
Well, I'm not sure that it affects this process so much. That is, on the final, we would expect to see a DOT permit.
Understood.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a few. There was a fairly lengthy list of things that staff had found at the TRT meeting. And I was just wondering, a lot of them were crossed out, but a lot of them were not crossed out. And I was just wondering whether there are any issues there that are remaining in that particular list of things, items.
Well, pretty much anything that isn't crossed off was not provided upon resubmission, which can be understandable depending on what it is. So one that can be crossed off now is providing a sample of financial assurance. But otherwise, what isn't crossed off or things that are bold on the checklist are not here yet. They're mostly not terribly substantial.
Along with that, Richard, I mean, that was going to be one of my points, is, I mean, there seems to be a lot of incompletes on that spreadsheet, so much so that I'm not really inclined to approve that this preliminary plan is complete. I mean, there's just too many things to say,
Said so.
okay,
No.
bring all these incompletes in at the final, you know, if we said that this plan was complete, the preliminary plan was complete, the next meeting would be the final plan, then you're giving us a whole bunch of information just before the final,
Mhm.
which I don't know about the rest of the board, but I don't particularly like.
No, I don't either like having a
Yeah.
whole long list, but there is another step in the review process. And, you know, as Elijah just said, many of these are kind of, you know, yes, they're issues, but they're not large issues. And, you know, I think that, you know, that's what the final review is for, is to see whether or not those things happen, or have happened.
I mean, if it helps to make you feel better, I just looking through.
I would like to feel better.
Yeah, no, I mean, some of these are either non-issues or, for instance, surrounding streets, abutters, intersected roadways of 200 feet or more. You don't, they're already shown, meaning there are none.
And a lot
Lots
of-
merged.
Sorry.
So it is one lot, but on the assessor's map, they still show it as a parcel 20 and parcel 20-1. It's basically an assessor's error, I'm gonna call it, that we are working out with them, but it doesn't need to be merged, it's already merged, it's one lot, 195 acre lot. So that is a non-issue as I see it. You know, again, so two of the incompletes are the same one, that 200 feet of site abutters and things like that, there are no roads, intersecting roads or driveways. Fire department letter, we have spoken to the fire department, as I understand it, he will be issuing that letter. The Hancock soil survey is in our drainage calculations, I think in a couple places in our narrative and our calculations. So that, it says incomplete, but we do have that as part of this application. So pre and post development plan views, we do have them. I don't know if that's it wasn't part of the narrative, it was part of the calculation. We submitted two documents, the land permit and narrative, which includes the narrative on the soil analysis. That did not have the pre and post maps. The calculations did have the pre and post maps. So again, a lot of these things are there. If they're just, they might not be, we might have put them in the wrong spot that you're used to seeing them, is all. The DOT we spoke to, that's in process and will certainly be provided for the final application as is required.
And these things being in process, not just a question for staff, these things being in process in general, we've said that's okay at this stage, is that correct?
I mean, it really depends on what it is. The permit.
Well, something like the DOT letter.
Right, so working through that with DOT, the stage is perfectly fine. One of the requirements before you should be reviewing criteria and standards is proof that they've made those applications. So site law and DOT
All
and
that.
whatever else. So that we know that it's truly in process.
True.
So it sounds like you will revisit the decommissioning plan, and hopefully within that, we can readdress the site stabilization. And here the language is kind of vague surrounding any areas of the facility that are disturbed during decommissioning will be stabilized with a ground treatment approved by the planning board. So I'm wondering sort of what our role is in that application. I think somewhere else I saw that you proposed a grass seed or something like that. I guess I just am wondering where will that be finalized, or will the language stay as something approved by the planning board?
Well, I think as part of this, I know there's soil erosion plans as part of the set and an O&M, operation and maintenance document, that includes a lot of erosion and sediment control language that will be approved by the board. So I think that's what it's in reference to, which has all been provided.
Gotcha.
It would be part of this, part of the
I can
final approval.
just make a little comment for the board. The fact that information may not be, say, adequate, but that is there. We're not now determining the adequacy of any of the things presented to us, just that it's there. So in that sense, it would be considered complete. It may not be any good, but it's there.
Sure, I'm just asking for clarification.
But at the same time, these are things that need to be clarified between now and then, so.
But but it's actually up to the applicant.
Oh, no, I get
Yeah.
that, I get that. These are just helpful hints.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Appreciate
Part
it.
of it is feedback, but ultimately, they're allowed to mess themselves up.
Try not to.
Yeah. I would comment as a totally non-factor, but there are three of us here who are left-handed.
Aha, I am too.
You, Elena,
for what it's worth.
and I, yes, the three of us. We're not in a majority, but you know, we're building.
It's a vocal minority, apparently.
Faction grows.
Can we get back to questions?
Yes, we can do that, yes.
I think in the last time we saw this, there was some question about Mr. Wedden, making some comments in a review in terms of the water going into the wetlands or whatever. My question is, since he was at the TRT meeting, were there any comments that he had? Or if he's here?
He's here.
He's hiding behind the
I
troll.
see.
Easels are my friend.
Easels are your friend. Well, I guess my question is then to you and you and you behind the thing, are we good with, what they said, what they were going to do or not do with respect to the wetland incursion or possible incursion?
If you're asking me to comment, I happily will. 'cause
I am,
This seems like a
personally.
good time to share. Yes, we made a lot of changes, and the procedures as far as site stabilization after construction are very good. There's only one thing I might add that might be very appropriate and very handy to whoever actually does the work. And that's that the site stabilization after construction can only take place between April 15 and September 15. It would be great to itemize the fact that what will happen if, say, construction is complete on November 15 is winter site stabilization before the final stabilization, which will take place after the next April 15. That would be a wonderful thing, because contractors, that may seem like minutia, contractors, I think, would benefit from an exact timeline. So you have all the items listed in your documentation as far as DEP risk management practices, but a timeline could be a wonderful thing. And we talked about having the city be a party to your quarterly inspections once they're done upon initial site stabilization, because we know it takes a couple of years to grow a meadow. And we encourage that to be on the final plan in the form that would make them happy.
And just like following up, you said that yeah, thanks. That someone from the city should review some of this stuff as it progresses. My question is, who is that someone? Is that code enforcement, or is that somebody else? Or you? Or don't we know?
I've been giving my 2 cents worth as the TRT process has evolved to both the planning department and code enforcement regarding that. And whoever the city chooses the staff to be, to help out the initial 2 years, the establishment for it, that's up to the city manager to decide, but we'll all be on the same page.
Okay.
And I believe in past approvals, we've required that the solar farm on their, give the inspection reports, and generally that's quarterly. Do you go quarterly
Yes,
inspections?
that's all in the O&M,
Yeah,
yes,
that's-
that was listed in there.
And those reports would go to the city, to the code enforcement?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's all in there
Yeah,
stipulated.
and my question though is does someone from the city actually go out in the field? And seeing a piece of paper is one thing, and seeing stuff in the field is
I would
presumably
probably
something else.
go with John. Yeah, we would do it together.
Okay, that's cool.
I think we left it generic as far as, I remember, I worked on this specifically, that the town be notified of the quarterly site walk or whatever,
Okay.
or otherwise, and the appropriate, we didn't specify who, but we said the appropriate
that's fine,
town
yeah.
staff be notified to be a part of that.
I just wanted to
Sidewalk.
make sure we were closing the loop.
Sure.
Relative to buffers and setbacks and so forth, I was just out looking at another solar site, and I thought to myself, gee, here's something that's supposed to be a visual buffer, and it was not up to snuff, as I would say, notwithstanding our approval. My question then is, you say something about a buffer of existing trees will remain untouched, which I appreciate that you're not gonna touch it. But my question is an existing line of trees necessarily an adequate buffer for visual impact? I mean, I left up some brush, that's not much. I left up 3 spindly pine trees or maple trees, that's not much. On the other hand, if it was high brush and a lot of it, or many, many trees, that's completely different. So, I guess that I would want to have some sort of confirmation that a significant buffer, whatever that might mean, is actually there, as opposed to just, some kind of shrub.
Yeah.
Let me just add that the idea of planting a tree is nice, but, it'll be, in good shape about the time we're closing this out, so. The idea of planting a 2-inch tree is not my idea.
Yeah. So you see on our plans, it'll show, I'm not sure what sheet it is, but it'll show that along Bucksport Road, you can see where our area of tree clearing is, and we leave the trees along Bucksport Road, which are fairly grown up right now, and it's pretty heavy vegetation right
You're saying
there.
it's significant.
Sorry?
You're saying it's significant.
It is, yeah, yeah, and I forget how many feet wide it is that we're leaving, but it's a pretty good buffer there. You know, we may clear a few branches along the access road as we're widening that, but otherwise on either side.
And most of your stuff is kind of gone over that way anyway, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like it's right up against the road
Right,
all that much.
right.
I mean, it looks like the first panels will be about 500 feet away from the.
Yeah,
from
no,
the
and I
road.
think that in this particular instance, I think that's absolutely right. And I guess I'm just making this comment more or less to get on the record as, you know, screening and so forth of different kinds of uses, but especially solar arrays, needs to be addressed in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, and I think it's a good mix of, you know, deciduous and other trees that, conifers, I
Screening.
believe. So, you know, in the wintertime, there'll still be vegetation there when the leaves are down.
Along those same lines, you said that the only people who can really see it are people 2,000 to 3,000 feet west of the project site. Is that pretty much right? And what exactly is their sight line? They're up high, I'm sorry, I didn't check that, I should have. They're up high and your sight's down low?
Correct.
And so they're looking down? Is there anything in between here and there, like some more good-sized trees?
There's
That-
a large,
that
yeah, there'd
provides
be a
a
large
buffer.
forest between, yeah, there's a vacant lot next door to ours, yeah.
Okay. So, and that's out of your control?
That's right.
Okay.
But the wetlands in and of itself on that west side, on the side you're talking about, which would be going up the hill as you're looking up plan.
Right.
You know, by default, we're not disturbing that wetland area that you can see kind of cuts a triangle, just by default, again, that can't be disturbed. I mean, we are cutting some trees here for the site, but this swath, you know, is wetlands that can't be, you know, that's gonna provide a screen in and of itself, so.
Okay.
I mean, Rick, the uphill lot is where the tiny house subdivision.
Oh, right, yeah, we talked about that last
Yeah.
time.
I mean, that lot got cut pretty hard. I mean, if they built more houses up there, they see some of the
Yeah.
panels, but,
But if those panels are there before they start doing that, then, you know, that's going into something with your eyes open. It's like, okay, I don't like those things being down there. Not, I would love them personally. I don't like those things being down there, but at least you're building your house or whatever after the panels are there, which is a way to help different than
Yeah.
the other way around, so.
Well, Rick, you know, you could always just cover the whole array.
I like that idea.
With a green tarp.
Oh, man, why didn't I just go there to start?
We'll blend right in.
Yeah, finally.
It might block access to light, but it satisfies the visual appearance.
Fine.
Very innovative.
Fine, I have a really pretty trivial comment here, not that my other ones were not trivial, but the letter about the, you know, closeout and all that came from MUFG Bank Limited. It would be nice if those kinds of letters came in on letterhead. Not that that proves or disproves anything, but it makes me feel better that they actually
Sure.
have a letterhead and so forth, because this, you know, it's like, okay, where did we get this bank, right? And that's, you know, note to staff as well, you know, those kinds of things should be on letterhead. Everybody else's stuff is. And that is that.
Okay. Anything further from the board?
I guess I would just ask Tom if the road is all right as far as fire department goes, and everything is copacetic with the fire department. I think at some point, and maybe it's in here, your chain link fence, you were gonna raise that like 6 inches off the ground.
Yes, I think they said.
For our animals?
Yes. Somebody-
I think they said that, didn't they? Somebody did, maybe it was the other
Somebody
guy.
did. I
I
think
mean,
it's
we
the other
kinda
one.
asked that in every.
The solar
I
guy
can't
was
remember if I
running
asked that in the
together.
sketch or if it's in this. We kinda ask every solar farm to do that.
If it's not, we'll make sure it's in the final.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's called out specifically on there, I'll double check, but yeah, on the final it will be.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is a public hearing. As I said before, anyone may comment on this matter I ask that you be recognized by the chair before coming up to the lectern and making your comment. Does anyone wish to speak? Okay. Another disappointment. In that case, I will close the public hearing. And what would the board like to do?
I'll let-
Go ahead.
well,
No,
I'll
do it.
I was gonna ask Elena something.
Yes,
So getting back to the incompletes,
yes.
is, do you see that as a problem with what is still missing?
Well, I can confirm that even though the scale doesn't show 200 feet off the site, there aren't any other driveways or intersecting roads. But that should still be shown. With the entrance, I think, as Chairman Fink said, that will resolve itself. We do want to see some more detail, at least to meet the city's standards for just paving to and/or beyond the right-of-way. Stormwater, I don't know if I missed plans that showed you pre- and post-development kind of directional flows to accompany the narrative, but if that was my mistake, then forget that. Merging the lots, I don't completely understand the discrepancy between the deed language and what has happened in the assessing office, but either way, it can be pretty easily resolved. Thomas just indicated that the accesses should be all set, so that's just kind of clerical at this point. I think the biggest items perhaps then are those that are specific to solar facilities and the performance standards. So, contact information, shutdown procedures, how the site will be stabilized, and revegetated following decommissioning, and those details of the decommissioning plan figures that we've discussed. I mean, most of that, the emergency contact shutdown procedures, that's for later anyway. That's for emergency response once it's constructed. So I'm not terribly concerned about what's missing, but
I mean, I would suggest, as far as the decommissioning plan goes, seeing as we always have a city lawyer review it, and, if his review is not complete at final, however long that takes, that's gonna hold you up. So the sooner you talk to, it's usually Ed Bear, and get the decommissioning plan fleshed out and get his stamp of approval, so to speak,
Right.
the better for you.
Which can be done offline of this process, obviously. You can
Yes.
still close it,
Yeah.
we could pursue that.
But it has to come together.
Absolutely,
Final
understood, yeah,
presentation.
for the final.
And, sorry, just a question on the decommissioning. In terms of what exactly you're looking for, are you looking for additional detail on the overall plan or on the sort of cost breakdown of what, further information on the cost that we've provided so far?
A little bit of both. I mean, the cost, compared to other plans that are the same size and twice as much, and just the legal language to protect the city. I mean, when we put the decommissioning plan in the ordinance, the top goal was to have something in place that if a developer bails on a project like this, it doesn't fall back on the taxpayer.
Sure.
And so, as important as that is, that's something we always want the city lawyer to look at and approve.
Yeah. That is fair.
in the past, we have, I guess in a sense, fudged the completeness and said that when there were minor incompletenesses, but the plan is complete with the following exceptions, which will be shown on the final. And
No, I understand that,
Yeah, it was
I just don't
just-
wanna
Yeah,
approve a preliminary plan that has too many incompletes
yes,
on it.
exactly.
And
But we've done that in the past, so as not to hold the whole process up for both ourselves and the applicant.
Nope,
I think to add an unusual wrinkle to that, and there's probably a small distinction here that could use a legal opinion, is when vesting occurs and whether it's making the application, getting on the agenda, or being found complete. Because having vested rights and being under review in light of, we anticipate the city council reviewing and potentially approving a moratorium on new proposals in a couple weeks, October 18th. So it currently is not written or drafted to apply to anyone that is pending or has received approval. They could change that on the 18th if that's what their desire really is. But there's a little bit of in-between area that's occurring right now.
So it kinda
Not that
sounds
that
like-
should affect your decision, but
And it kinda sounds like they'd have better legal standing if the preliminary plan was approved.
yes.
Just in case. So you ready?
I'm ready.
I'll make a motion
I don't have to be ready, but go ahead.
that we find the preliminary plan complete with review of a major use site development entitled Ellsworth Renewables for Nexamp Solar LLC. The proposal is to construct a 5 megawatt large-scale solar energy system on a 94.6 acre parcel, tax map 37 lots 20 and 20-1 located on the Bucksport Road. The subject property is located in the rural R and drinking water DW zoning districts.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please?
Aye.
Thank you.
You survived.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'll get you your letter tomorrow.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Next item of business is a final plan review for a major use site development entitled BD Solar Ellsworth for BD Solar Ellsworth LLC. The proposal is to construct a 3.3 megawatt large-scale solar energy system on a 95 acre parcel, tax map 93 lot 2, located on the Colin Road. The subject property is located in the rural and resource protection zones. Is someone representing the applicant, please?
Yes, good evening, Sean Thies with Haley Ward and Bob Cleaves with BD Solar is here tonight. So we have, since the last meeting, there was only a few things needed to resubmit. Essentially, a memo and a plan indicating the change of the applicant name from BD Solar Ellsworth to BD Solar Mcmullen. So we had provided that information, and we had also received some peer review comments based on the stormwater review. And we provided revised stormwater narrative and some phosphorus calculations to address the peer review comments. And I also have an email to share with, there was a comment that we had received from one of the planning board members, a question about CO2 emissions, and I think it was more just a informational type question, not necessarily part of the ordinance. But the applicant did prepare some calculations to show what the offset would be of CO2 emissions from the solar, and it was estimated to be the equivalent of 990 households reduction, essentially eliminating CO2 from 990 households would be what the solar would offset. So I have those. Do you want those, Alina, or pass them
You
forward?
can, yeah, you can pass them out and make sure that Carrie at least gets a copy, and I'll take one if there's an extra.
Is this the same thing we were given before, or somebody sent?
I think you were emailed it today.
I just sent the city today.
Thank you.
What's happening, Chief?
Hmm?
What's happening?
I was just waiting for papers to start.
Oh, okay.
So, questions from the board?
I'll ask a question on, it has to do with the stormwater, and Andrew McCulloch references in his peer review, and that's basically on page 2 of the stormwater management plan. Uncovered, undeveloped cover type woods fair, and undeveloped cover type woods good. Because the difference in the fair and the good is whether you have less water going off or more water going off. So I guess, where does the fair and good come into play, and who makes that determination?
So, the model that's used to model the stormwater runoff is called the Hydrocad. It's a computer program where we input various data into. And in a wooded situation, you have the option of calling the woods poor, fair, or good. And each one has a different, it's called a curve number, or runoff coefficient, which essentially means like a parking lot has a higher runoff curve number, and well, woods or very sandy soil have a lower runoff curve number. So we generally model, it's hard to differentiate, it's whoever's professional judgment, whether you call it poor, fair, or good. We generally go with fair as a in-between type situation. The definitions, I think, have a lot to do with, I think it talks about grazing, as in animal grazing, and if it's allowed or it's restricted. Well, an open area of woods in Maine, I would say nothing is really restricted from wild animals grazing in it, but and so also, I guess, it's not encouraged with livestock or farm animals out there grazing, which that's the difference between, I think good says no grazing is allowed, and then get down to poor where it's essentially grazing is more encouraged. So we had modeled it as fair. The peer review comments suggested maybe to model it as good instead of fair. So we showed what the numbers, the difference is between the two models. If you average them out to go even sort of between fair and good, it comes out to almost zero as being the difference between the pre and post. Either way, the numbers are very small. If you go with the goods, it's the good classification, it's approximately 1 CFS increase on a 25-year storm event, which is a pretty small number. So it's our opinion to still fair is a fair representation of what the model would be for that type of woods. But I wanted to show you the numbers that if we did model it as good, that he suggested what those come out to, what the difference is.
So I would ask staff if we presume this is good according to Andrew's determination, are the figures okay?
Well, so it sounds like if it is calculated as starting out good instead of starting out fair, there's a small increase under the flooding control standard. But what the peer reviewer, Andrew McCullough, said, and you've reinforced in your narrative, I think, is it's a professional call for an engineer of what fits. So I think it would still end up a little ambiguous there. He wasn't representing that it was completely inappropriate to classify as fair instead of good. So we did have a site visit to see the type of vegetation existing, the woods existing. So I suppose you could factor that into. I wouldn't say they were the biggest of trees, and
I guess one other observation that Andrew made was on the last page about the temporary and permanent sediment and erosion controls. Are you familiar with that paragraph there about that he recommends incorporating a stabilized construction exit?
I think
Yeah,
that's
so
shown now.
we had that, we had the detail included on our detail sheet. I don't think it was specifically called out on the site plan itself. And I don't recall if we added that note. If not, we can add that note to the plan that the board signs.
I have a general, before we go on, I have a general question about peer review process or whatever. And that's really for them, not for you necessarily, but you can listen. And that is, does the planning board have the opportunity to ask specific questions whenever there's going to be a peer review? So in other words, last meeting you said, hey, we're going to have a peer review on this, okay? And that probably has accompanied some general guidance to the engineer. My question is, in that process, could I ask some questions or ask the peer review guy, by guy being an asexual term, the peer review guy to include discussion of X, Y, Z? Is that clear? I mean,
I don't think that ordinance speaks to that either way, but if there's something particular that is of concern to you and that has inspired the board's desire for a peer review, I don't think that's wrong to direct here's something particular
okay,
that we needed.
but my point though, I mean,
Yeah.
that's good, but it goes through you though, right?
Right.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes, and so I shared the updated information. So I did receive just one additional comment, which is in regard to the phosphorus calculations, so I don't know if you're prepared for that, but.
No,
And I mean, I think the other, you could also ask the peer reviewer to attend and explain what they've written, that
after the fact.
increases everybody's, but.
That's fine. That was just a sidebar clarification. Thank you.
Further questions or comments from the board?
Sure. It's basically the same questions that I had before for Mr. Whedon. You were at the TRT meeting and so forth. And the question is, are you good with what they've said here from a water guy perspective?
Well, from the water perspective, I'll address that. I believe they're NERPA permit. They're DEP.
I'm sorry, say again?
I'll speak a little more loudly. I believe the applicant's DEP Natural Resources Protection Act application states that the natural vegetation before construction will be retained as to increase or provide stormwater protection after the final project is completed. And that's interesting, and I'm hugely in favor of that. My question for you, for the planning board members, and to reference your own site visit, if you saw a lot of natural vegetation on the construction site, which would be completely eliminated by the harvesting necessary to get a construction site, how will that be incorporated in their final plan for site stabilization? That was my question or prompt to you, because I don't understand how that can be done, though I'm a huge in favor of it. And the second is a quarterly exam of the meadow or existing vegetation, whatever is there, for site stabilization. I still think is a wonderful idea that other applicants have agreed to and will be incorporating. And I would suggest that you might envision that same kind of evaluation to ensure that this site stabilization is similar.
So there is added to the plan notes similar to what we've done with other projects about city staff attending quarterly inspections, post-construction.
What about during construction? I mean, pre-construction is one thing, it's easy, you don't have to inspect very much, right? Post-construction is, but what do they do, and, is it working? But during construction, could be a real issue, it seems to me.
Yeah.
So do we do inspections of this ilk during construction?
We can. This is all new to us, these solar farms.
Yeah, okay.
So we have an electrical inspector, a commercial electrical inspector that handles all of the electrical installation. And we can add our inspection to go out there. I can go out there with John. I think Thomas went out.
For my money, I'd like to see a during construction kind of inspection for the runoff and stuff like that, because, while you don't dig a lot of stuff up, really, okay, I mean, compared to, putting in parking lots and stuff like that, nonetheless, some of this can be, especially when it's in close proximity to some sort of water feature.
So that's in our.
You could kind of screw it up during.
That's in our, so it's actually, it's a stormwater permit by rule,
Right.
not the Natural Resource Protection Act permit by rule, but that's a requirement for, during construction, the
Okay,
applicant
during.
developer is required to do it, but I think as part of the, I'm assuming we'll need like a building permit or something from the city, and I think that gives the city the right for them to come out and
Well, it's like we
do
said-
any sort of inspections that they want during
Exactly.
construction.
I mean,
as
it's what we
well.
said before, that when, give them notification that, our guy's notification that you're at a certain point, and so forth, so.
So, yeah, we're required to do it during construction and post-construction, I guess, and it's
In which
up
case
to
they-
the city whether they want to
Participate.
do it as well.
Yeah.
Well, are you required to inspect post-construction by?
Well, post-construction by,
By the city?
more by the city than,
Yes.
than DEP, but
And I'm not-
DEP
and
more
I'm not-
addresses during construction.
I'm not saying during, as opposed to after, I'm saying in addition to.
Right.
Yeah, well, yeah, so my understanding is that the state standards would, that this is subject to with regard to stormwater, establish inspection requirements for erosion and sedimentation control, at least during construction, and we are adding on the post-construction, ensuring that the vegetation is established and,
And that's all good.
yeah.
If I remember correctly, there's a wood chip berm around the whole facility.
It's either wood waste berm or a silt fence. I mean, and typically in a wooded site where we have the material to be ground on site and used for erosion control measures. In other sites, if there's not enough of that, then it'd be more of a standard silt fence.
Now, like, at what point of the construction does that get built?
It gets built after the site is cleared, before you start
Before the.
grubbing, disturbing the ground, so.
And how long a time period is that maintained?
Throughout until there's stabilization of grass growth. In the case of a wood chip berm, it could essentially remain out there for, I mean, it has to be maintained, so if there is runoff and silt builds up behind it, it needs to be removed and cleaned up during construction, but even post-construction, I mean, if there was silt fence used, you'd want that removed, you don't want that black plastic, like fence out there forever, but the wood chip berm could just decompose over time and stay there.
But basically, I mean, you would have to maintain that to the point where the grass. or-
Until we establish grass growth. Until essentially erosion's not an issue any longer because we have adequate grass.
I mean, I think that would, from the city standpoint, I think that would be an important thing to, during the inspections, to keep track of, to make sure that that berm is in place and doing what it's supposed to do. To make sure it's there, before the grass starts to grow.
In all this runoff stuff and so forth, you talk in some report or another that we had here about where the summation points are, or you talk about the summation points. Are they shown anywhere on any of these drawings?
They are shown on, there's pre and post hydrology plans. Which
Okay.
show essentially the site is broken into two watersheds because the road almost
No,
runs
I mean,
along the
I get what they are, but I didn't
Okay, yeah.
see them necessarily, but it could be just my error.
Yeah, they're on the hydrology plans that were
Okay.
provided with the
And we have
stormwater
that.
calculations.
I think so, yes.
And in that same vein, you were talking about this good versus fair or whatever thing. You said there will be no significant change in flow. How much is that? You start to use terms like significant
Well-
without definition.
In this case, using the good, I think it was approximately one CFS.
What would,
on a
what
25
would
on a
significant
25
have
years
been
long
in your
time.
mind?
Oh, well, it also becomes, I guess, relative for how big the site is and what the project is for a site, in this case, a property of, well, we didn't model the full 95 acres, but in this case, we modeled probably 20-ish acres or more. So I would say one CFS is
And this is
not-
well below that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and especially where we're draining to a wetland on one side that can absorb, and we're not talking about contaminated water here, we're just talking about runoff, so this wetland bog area can absorb water on one side and a stream on the other side. It's not like we're directly onto a neighbor's property.
And I have one last question, and I apologize because I've not been at the site. I missed the on-site review because I had other pressing business, just so it wasn't blowing you off. Mcmullen Road has come up as a problem road, and if any of you living on Mcmullen Road, I apologize. But as a problem road with respect to, washouts and what happens in the spring and all that kind of good stuff. But I understand part of the road is okay, and then part of the road is not so okay. My question is, you have construction going to occur during the winter, is that correct on this site?
Not necessarily.
Okay, I thought I saw it. But in any event, I guess my question is, if this is going to occur in the winter or the spring, early spring, is the coming and going of construction equipment, which is obviously occurs during construction because after there's not very much at all, but what's going to be the impact? Will there be any impact on Mcmullen Road as a result of your guys coming and going with, whatever size trucks and stuff like that?
Right.
And I guess that's a question for staff as well.
Well, I would say, in general, I'm not sure if the city posts Mcmullen Road in the spring as far as being able to have
I see
trucks
somebody
going on.
nodding their head
I know
yes.
there's only a portion of it that's, I think, town road, then it turns private, but we'd have to cross the town
But
road.
the city
piece
still has
get
to
it.
maintain some stuff down there, as I understand it. They have to maintain access to
To the boat
the
launch.
lake or the boat dock or something. And so my question is that going to be degraded as a result of this? And if it is, who gets to fix it?
Well, I would say the contractor and developer, if there's damage that occurs to the road, they'd have to repair that as part of the project. But there wouldn't be any, I guess, desire to be running a bunch of trucks out there on a wet spring, muddy road and just
Having them disappear.
making it worse. Yeah, it's timing of construction until it's appropriate to be able to do
So
the work
that's in the
without
record,
causing
right, what he
damage.
just said? I expect to see him out there with a wheelbarrow and some rocks.
We certainly can add that wording to that effect to the final
Yeah.
final approval.
Right.
I mean, there is, over the years, there's always been a lot of forestry going on there too, so there's a lot of log trucks coming in and out and. all
It may
times
be hard to differentiate who did what, but at the same time, it's,
Well, are you meaning a condition of approval that says not passing during a certain time of year? I think that's easier to enforce than to try to figure out who caused damage during that time of year.
that's a good point.
Do you have a timeline?
I think that's still not specifically determined yet. I'm wondering if we could have it be limited to a certain time of the year, and then if we elect to do construction otherwise, that we would be held liable for any damage to the road. I'm wondering if that's,
What we've done in some other cases is you go out, you videotape the road prior to doing any work to see what condition it's in. But I understand the other point of, if we're doing this project and they're logging down the road, and who's to say?
Well, I guess, and I have no idea how much
Who's
logging is
responsible
going
for the
on
damage,
that
but,
road at this point. I mean,
I
there may
think
be
So
a
we're sort of
lot.
speculating too that that might occur.
I think the biggest impact would be right at the entrance to the site, with, trucks turning in and out.
Right.
It's not that long of a section between, I think, where the pavement stops
Right.
before we get to this site, so.
To further muddy the waters, you say in one of these reports, is that the completion date is winter 2022, which is this winter. Just saying.
Yeah.
yeah.
I intended that to be essentially December of 2022, as in that winter.
Yeah, well,
Because I think that it say start in spring of 2022?
no, it just says completion date.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Winter 2022, so my guess is that, to me, we can take a vote if you like, what winter 2022 means, whether it's next December or this January.
That would probably change your sort of erosion control plan too, depending on when you begin construction and exposed soil you have in your plans that.
Yeah, so there is provisions in there for winter construction. But typically, I mean, ideally, it's start in late spring when things are dry enough and be completed prior to. Because as Mr. Whedon has mentioned before, there's timing restrictions on when you can start seeding to get
Right.
grass growth, and ideally, that's all done in time, so you're not coming back the next year to reseed everything, because you couldn't complete it.
See, Ellsworth, by the way, do say spring 2022 to winter 2022, which is an interesting concept.
Work backwards.
Yeah, exactly. That's- I've heard of turning the clock back. That's it, sorry.
Anyone else? Okay, this is a public hearing. And with all the things I said before, does anyone wish to comment on this? Hearing, seeing no one, I shall close the public hearing. Excuse me?
Yeah, no, here she comes, yep.
My name's Mary Ellen Hunt. I just have a question. I guess one of my concerns before I even came tonight was this wood chip berm. Because the property's very close to the stream that runs into Green Lake, and also a stream that floods commonly, which is just beyond the property, but it runs downhill to this stream. My concern was, we've been told to use wood chip for things on our property, and we find that over time it doesn't work. It decays and sinks, and it's not effective once that starts happening. Now, am I understanding that berm is only going to be there temporarily and then removed, so there's nothing to hold off the runoff to the stream?
The berm is not for runoff. The berm is to prevent silt from moving
During
off.
construction?
Until there's sufficient grass growing to make that not a concern. So
to the
after,
point where it's stabilized, so that there's not a runoff problem at that point, is what you're saying?
there's
They
not
have
no-
to keep
there's
that
not an erosion problem.
erosion problem, right?
Yeah. And then, at that point, there's no need to maintain the wood burn. And they're proposing just that it naturally decays.
Yeah, it does naturally decay,
Yeah,
I can tell you
so
that.
That's its purpose and what's intended.
And I think in the previous talk, these solar arrays, there is a decommission plan that when they're done using them, they must take the equipment back off the property and put it back, and that's already preset at this point? Okay.
Yes, the plan is,
The only-
As part of
only-
the application.
Yeah, the only other concern as far as the road, Mcmullen Road is a constant problem, year-round, anytime we get any heavy rain. Where this site is, just beyond it, where this site will run downhill to that stream, is a common flooding problem. And I think the concern is that they're saying they're responsible, but who's going to fix it to allow all the residents? I mean, there's probably 75 homes down in there that we all need to get in and out this road. Who's going to be responsible to make sure immediately we can get in and out of the road? If this is, construction has messed up and it's causing further problems to that commonly flooding brook anyway. Who's responsible at that point to make sure the road gets fixed so we can get in and out, fire trucks can get in and out, and things like that? 6 months later, oh yeah, we'll take responsibility and fix it back up, doesn't cure that problem.
I would direct that to city staff, particularly code enforcement.
Public
Code
Works.
enforcement have a
Yeah.
comment.
Public Works would be responsible, because we maintain it so they can get in and out of there.
Right, the city maintains that road.
Yeah.
So at that point, when we can't get in and out, we're to go to Public Works?
If it's after hours, the police department would contact them if there was a problem.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your comments and questions. Was there anyone else who wished to speak at this point? Okay, the public hearing is now closed, and what does the planning board?
Can I ask one more question?
Sure, I mean, why not? It's
Why
what the
not?
planning board
On the-
wishes to do. Ask the
On the
question.
site plan, you show snow removal areas, where snow is gonna be, put from the plowing of the road that goes down the center of the thing. And some of those snow areas, if you will, are hard up against the delineated wetland. And granted, there's a berm or something in between. Is that, I guess my question is, what happens if snow storage, if you will, extends into the wetland if snowfall is high? Like, if it was like last year, no sweat, right? But if it's like a couple, 3 years ago, then, that's gonna be a pretty big pile of snow. And my guess is it'll go straight into the wetland.
So we have our 7-foot fence separates
That's
the
right along there,
wetland, the
okay.
wetland from our site, so we can't push, obviously, the snow beyond our fence.
Good answer.
Thank you.
Give credit where it's due.
Okay, does anyone on the board wish to do anything at this point?
I just like to, we talked about the cost of decommissioning and how low the previous one was, which was under 100,000. Their solar farm is smaller with a cost of 240,000.
And that probably includes salvaging material.
Yeah, so it's like, you kind of wonder how somebody with a bigger solar farm can do it for 40% of what your cost is.
These guys aren't as good as those guys, that's pretty clear.
No comment.
We'll have to hire them to decommission.
They're a competitor, no comment.
I think one thing I will want to make a condition of approval is that the decommissioning figures, not so much the figures, but the the paperwork is approved by the city attorney, the decommissioning bond.
Now, is that, so is that I understand conditional approval, but I would assume that would be like prior to issuing a building permit? Because, I mean, we wouldn't actually have a final bond or letter of credit before they're ready to actually start construction on the project, so I mean.
Yeah, I mean, that's generally how code handles that, doesn't it? That,
We only issue electrical permits, we don't issue building permits for these projects.
or maybe it doesn't need to be before a permit, but prior to construction, we need to have an approved
I
bond.
would recall how we normally word that in the past, Elena.
I don't know if we've come across it at that level yet. So I think we've already been pushing it out from being a submission requirement to being a condition of approval. And I think that there's, that's reasonable in light of the timeline of these projects and the nature of them. That's tricky. I mean, it makes sense to me to be able to wait until it's actually going to be constructed, because the concern is, once it's constructed, to make sure that it can be deconstructed, right? Like, that's the assurance that it's providing. So it's not really relevant until it is being constructed. The administrative task of tracking things at different states over, as we discussed with a different project earlier, maybe 3 years, that's a bit of a challenge, but that's what we're here for. So I would be open to condition either prior to site work, or prior to the start of construction, as opposed to just an electrical permit when you start hooking things up, or prior to an electrical permit.
How would you like me to phrase it?
See, this is why I started writing memos to draft it all. Condition. Yeah.
Just say that they're gonna fix that language.
Well, a condition of approval that prior to the issuance of electrical permit, that's the only thing we can really track and hold back, that
And
the.
the building permit wasn't issued for the solar farms on 180?
An interesting concept in and of itself.
Even though they had buildings going up.
I wasn't part of that, Dwight was at that time. But if they constructed a building, they would have to get a building permit. The solar panels are not required to have a building permit. They do have to meet setback when it comes to property lines and wetlands and that kind of thing.
Perhaps just prior to the issuance of any permits. Or any city, city permits, code enforcement office permits, but, and I would use the phrase financial assurance of performance. What kind of example did you provide?
I believe we provided a sample letter of credit.
So I don't know if you're able to commit to type at this stage, but that would not hurt.
And I think we said typically it would probably either be a letter of credit or a bond. I don't know if they really want to commit to one or the other at this point, but either one would have to be acceptable to the city attorney or the
At what point,
city council.
is that something that needs to be provided with state permitting, or is that only if you have state law?
Well, the new decommissioning law that just went
That
into
only-
effect is now going to require for anything over 3 acres, I believe, so.
So that would be you.
Yeah, it's going to be essentially almost every solar.
So at what stage does the state require that decommissioning financial assurance?
It's a good question. I think it's,
That was prior to commencement of construction.
yeah, prior to construction, I think.
Same.
If you condition it based on issuance of all other necessary municipal permits, then that would effectively address the prior to commencement of construction. Because you would commence construction until you had all those in place.
There's layers here.
I mean, it looked like he wanted to say something.
I do, may I have
Excuse me?
may I have your, it's a public hearing, correct?
No,
Not anymore.
public hearing was closed when I asked if there were any further,
I didn't hear you close, this lady talked, and then there was a discussion about
and then
decommissioning.
I asked once again if there were anyone wished to comment. There was no reaction from the public, and I closed the public hearing.
You're talking about an issue that I don't think the planning board has authority to grant the condition that's being
I'm
asked.
sorry, the public hearing is closed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The planning board's making a legal error at the moment.
That's your opinion, sir.
Yep.
So,
Are you all set with that, Vice Chair?
I think so.
okay, is someone ready to make a motion?
It better be John.
It doesn't have to be.
No, it better be.
Let's see.
I'll make a motion to approve the final plan review for major use site development entitled BD Solar Ellsworth for BD Solar Ellsworth LLC. The proposal is to construct a 3.3 megawatt large-scale solar energy system on a 95 acre parcel, tax map 93, lot 2, located on Napoleon Road. The subject property is located in the rural R and resource protection RP zone districts, with the condition that the BD Solar provide financial insurance and performance bond to the satisfaction of the city attorney prior to issuances of any permits.
Second.
Okay?
Just one correction.
Okay.
It should be BD Solar Mcmullen, not BD Solar Ellsworth. That was the old entity applicant name.
Okay.
Not that I want you to read it again, but
You get that, Carrie? Okay.
She probably knew that. Second.
Does that sound about right, Elena?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's been a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? In that case, all in favor, please indicate.
Aye.
Thank you. Is there a negative vote?
I guess it just feels, I mean, all of this planning.
You can, of course, just abstain.
Can I abstain?
I don't see why not.
I'm not convinced that the drinking water source will not be affected. I feel that we, as a city, do not know long-term ramifications of this type of development yet, because it is so new to the area. And I support progressive alternative energy sources. It just feels precarious, and it's our drinking water.
I'm not sure that is directly
So-
covered by the ordinance.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
I don't know what that means.
Anyhow,
For this process.
what this means is that there is well, the yes votes carry.
There
We
you go.
don't have a majority against it. But I have no problem.
I would just make.
I have been in the minority before, a long, long time ago. These things happen.
In terms of these numbers here, this little thing that you sent by email, you said 2.57 tons of CO2 per year for average household. I found sources that went as high as 7 something, so I don't think I put a lot of stock in that number being accurate to the nearest hundredth of a ton.
Yeah, well noted. This, you'll ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different
No, well,
opinions
that
about
was
it.
very clear
Yeah, it's very tricky. The math
from
is
my,
very tricky, very
my
fast.
extensive research on
Yeah.
Google. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Patrick's They gave something. He just asked
The
them.
next item of business is a preliminary plan review for a major use site development entitled Hughes Brothers Concrete Plan. The Hughes Brothers Incorporated, the proposal is to construct a heavy industry use, that is a concrete plan, on a portion of a 95-acre parcel located at 575 Bucksport Road, tax map 3, lot 47. The subject property is located in the industrial zone district. Is someone representing the applicant, please?
Yes. My name is Janet Hughes. I'm a professional engineer. I'll give you a little background. I haven't been before the city of Ellsworth before. I come from-
You'll survive.
I did most of my business in my earlier years in Aroostook County. I owned an engineering company up there, that's how I came to the city. And then worked for Woodard and Curran as a consultant probably over 10 years. Then joined Hughes Brothers about 15 years ago. At Hughes Brothers, I'm an environmental manager. I used to practice professional engineering. My focus is obviously environmental engineering. With me today is Larry Langell. Larry is the president of Hughes Brothers. And the reason why we're here today with this proposed concrete plan.
Okay, why don't you, for the benefit of both the board and the public, as we have a wider public on televised signal, describe the project, please, and what you hope to happen.
Absolutely, I'd love to. You'll see here on our site plan that we propose to build a concrete plant in the city of Ellsworth. Currently, we're in Hamden. We serve the greater Bangor Brewer region with concrete. We've done that since the 1940s. So we were one of the first concrete plants in Penobscot County, and we won't be the first one in Hancock County, but we'd like to take part in that. We're proposing to develop an approximate 3-acre area on a 9-acre parcel on property currently owned by Mcmullen Landscape. And Mcmullen owns a 95-acre parcel, and he operates a small gravel pit, the intermittent use type gravel pit. There's no processing of equipment or anything, and that extends up the road. So this site is located, for anyone who's not familiar, the site is located about 3 miles off the intersection of Main Street and Bucksport Road. It's on the right. It's approximately across the street from Coastal Drilling in that general area, and this way. That's about the far extent of it, and it's across the street. So the site is accessed by a gravel road that extends to the Mcmullen gravel pit. It's the only other development on the road. We are proposing, as you can see here, we're proposing a approximately 3-acre developed site. About 2.5 of it is impervious, and the other half is developed area. So here we have a concrete plant. That concrete plant we're proposing to manufacture approximately 15,000 cubic yards of concrete annually. To start, hoping that we're going to get up to 20,000 yards. That's really the number that we're looking for to be successful here in Ellsworth. We know that concrete demand well. Like I said, we've been doing this for a long time. So the plan is actually, the manufacturing is based on the demand of the region. We can't do any more than that. On this site, you'll see that in our application that we've done some stormwater management calculations. I asked Haley Ward to run those calculations, provide that stormwater management permit, and to develop and run the numbers for flooding calculations to meet your ordinance. This concrete plant, it encompasses what you see there is a proposed building. We're not quite sure if we want to put a building up there. What that building would do for us is basically encompass a hopper. And that hopper is what keeps what holds the aggregates that go into the mix. And just to back up a little bit, what exactly does that concrete plant do? Concrete plant, we bring in stone, we bring in sand. We need water. We stockpile stone and sand on the site. The stone and the sand, we get an order for concrete, bring the concrete truck in. Concrete truck backs underneath this silo. This silo is full of cement powder. So we need those three things to make concrete. Aggregate, which is stone and sand, water, and we need cement. The aggregates are conveyed through this conveyor that's shown on the plan and inside of this building, which is actually a hopper. And the stone, sand, the conveyor is radial, so it moves to different pockets of that conveyor. The operator operates, used to be back in the day, they're levers and had to be right there. Now you have a screen, it's software, you punch in your mix design, takes all those things, takes your hopper, your cement, your water, sends it into the truck. And in the truck is where it's mixing. So when you see the concrete truck coming down the road, that's what it's doing, it's actually mixing. And that's where the chemical reaction comes to make concrete. Occasionally, or often, should I say, you need additives. You want to speed up that chemical reaction, slow that down. For durability, add air, which is actually a liquid that's added. And for example, air would be provided if you wanted to have frost resistance. So that's, for the most part, that's what it is. Stormwater calculations, these green biocells, the proposal is to treat the stormwater, to remove any suspended solids, and to discharge to this wetland, which also provides a little bit of capacity of stormwater, helps to retain the water. They've calculated the flood potential in an off-site area. There's a lip off to the side here. There's a swale right here, and they've shown that the flooding potential is actually decreased by not 1 cubic foot per second, but like 2.5, which is significant, right?
Yeah.
One must be insignificant. See if there's any more that I can tell you about that. We've submitted our preliminary application. We think that we have addressed each one of the items. We have a little bit of work to do to add to few things on the site plan. We want to talk about traffic, and we'd love to address any questions that you would have about this site.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
Before I ask questions about the project, I gotta ask Larry a question.
Sure.
Just going by the name, you're from the county?
Yes,
Did your father have a construction company?
he did.
That used to come down here all the time and did
That he did.
groundwork for
Yes.
Who's your
telephone?
father?
and-
Yep, it
Okay.
was.
I said, there's gotta be a relative. I used to work on the police department, I was a police chief and
Yep.
dealt with, I think, your father and the crew. I mean, I was always impressed with the work they did, and they were always a pleasure to work with.
Yep.
Never had any problems with them.
Awesome.
Okay. One thing
Yeah, but you don't know, the kid.
well, you know, I hope he takes after his father. Not so much directed to you, but this project, and you talk about a future building, possible building, and I think somewhere in here it said it could be about 1,500 square feet. And I guess I would pitch to planning department, to code and planning, that I think this is a significant enough project that if there were any changes, if this was added in the future, if this receives approval, and something like this was added in the future, that this would, any additions would come back to the planning board.
Well,
I mean, it's up to, you know, under that, and we've talked about the under 5,000 threshold, and hopefully that'll change when we get to changes, but I'll throw that pitch to you guys, that, just because of the significance of this project,
yeah, I think having phases without identifying the phasing, and it makes it another area of ambiguity of will it be there or won't it, and.
right, because, I mean, you could get into the incremental buildup of 1,500 square feet, 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet, and you're over, our ordinance says anything over 5,000 square feet basically has to come to the planning board. And
I will tell you that for that building, it won't be any larger than, if it was 2,000 square feet, that it couldn't really get any larger. The only reason to have that is to keep that hopper that's inside warm, so that aggregate doesn't freeze. So we can't put frozen materials into the concrete. So for us, that building wouldn't get any larger than that. And if we find that there's demand in Ellsworth to justify putting up a building to run in the winter, so right now we would propose that we run from approximately the 1st of April to the end of November, and you're shut down because of freezing conditions, water's freezing, your additives are freezing. And if we find that demand in the winter, then we would propose that. And we're really unsure about that. We're really unsure if the Ellsworth area really has a demand that would justify that. So right now, we could actually send trucks from our Bangor office, our facility, Camden facility, here in the winter. We can only do that for so long, though.
Okay, thank you. Just to the board's dedication, remember when we worked on the Mcmullen property, there was another piece of property, 20 or 30 acres between Mcmullen and Woodland Road. Well, that property has now been purchased by, it was harvested, the wood was harvested, and that property is now owned by Mcmullen. Not that it affects this, but I just thought I'd let you guys know that it may, you know, at some point, or the gravel pit. I guess, question to the staff, if Mcmullen sells 9 acres to Hughes, is there any impact on Mcmullen's stormwater? The calculations that he did, whatever was done for that property, taking that away.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I didn't look at the past approval with that eye, but I understand, you know, the requirements of gravel pits to be pretty minimal because of their internal drainage. And I recall the location of the pit on that lot being quite far in.
Yeah. I just thought I'd bring it up just to.
Yep, good point.
Yeah.
I don't see how it changes the land in such a way that we'd be concerned. Also, this parcel has its own, will have its own stormwater plan.
Right, but was stormwater from the Mcmullen property going into the 9 acres that they're proposing to buy?
So that stormwater, in essence, stayed on their site.
Right.
And now
But now if they
but
buy
now
that
they're
9
buying that
acres,
site.
it's going off their site. You see what I mean?
Oh,
Yeah, but they'll be responsible for the stormwater from their own site.
but, and you can't
Well, they
retroactively
will,
go
but
back to the
no,
other
what
guy.
I'm saying is, does it affect Mcmullen's approval at all? Because now,
Well-
if stormwater was going off the Mcmullen site onto what they propose to buy,
Is it changing the geography of the land that much?
No,
But you can't go back to the, you know, the guy with the gravel pit at this point, because he's,
also because,
Not approved,
again,
right?
this project will handle its, for the stormwater and anything would be coming off onto their property would be doing that regardless of any development on the other property. I don't see
I could add a
an
little
issue.
bit.
can we ask staff to check this out?
Well,
this issue?
Yeah, I mean,
the engineer.
This stormwater up here,
Yep.
he's got a permit, or a DEP permit for, under the performance standards. He can only be 5 acres small for a gravel pit, right? It's internally draining, so the water that's captured is internally draining because of what it is, sand and gravel, aquifer of sorts. So it's drained on site, however, the road is not. And under those performance standards, he has to monitor his drainage on the road. And what you'll find here on the road is that the water does run down these sides. And then to add to that, this water, when modeled, the water from this part of the site is, see these contours? This direction. It's not this direction.
no,
It's this direction. And so it's to the east. And so it's not impacting the site. In addition to that, we've routed water away from, any upgrading water, we've routed away from the site development. I think that answers your question.
And you're
This
not
does
proposing
fit in.
any blasting or mining yourselves?
No.
Right?
Any exposures would be detrimental
No
to their
explosives.
business.
Didn't sound like it.
on your proposed traffic generation, you have 4 different categories, 15,000 cubic yards, 20, 25, 30. I mean, obviously you're predicting future growth, but I'm just curious as to how, under the 20,000 cubic yards, you're estimating 15 deliveries, but under the 25,000 cubic yards, you estimate 13 deliveries. For 30,000 cubic yards, you're back up to 15 deliveries.
I will explain that. Part of breaking the traffic generation was in response to the TRT review the first time we met, to provide greater detail and to look at, and the question is, what is the future demand? So when you see the first two, you'll see that it says seasonal operation. When we start up works, we're not gonna be able to be at full capacity. So we're trying to show you what the traffic would be to start, which we'd expect in ADT for the first few years of about 30 vehicles per day. And then moving towards, we need to sell the 20,000 cubic yards of concrete in order to even to justify at all a building and running through the winter. So we're not gonna do any more than 20,000 unless we're set up for winter operations. We'd like to do that because we want to be able to, part of the game is to be able to service your customers, regardless of whether or not that your output will be less in the winter. So then it moves down to annual operation. So what I did, to be conservative, is on the seasonal operation, I only looked at an 8-month period, that April through November. So when you do that, you're looking at an ADT of 30 over that 8-month period, instead of looking at it as a 12-month period, which the numbers would be significantly lower. When you get to the annual operation, then you use the 12 months, because that's the operational period. So that actually decreases because you're gonna have, your average daily traffic will be significantly lower through the winter months. As you can see, we're only looking at, another 5,000 yards through those winter months. And most of the time in January, you're not seeing much.
If I might make some comments about the trip generation and the ADT and so forth. I mean, with all due respect, there are serious errors with the way you've counted your trips. And those propagate through to what you actually ask the state for, okay? So your numbers of trips are significantly lower. For example, you're not really counting ADT. You're counting trips in. Well, trips in, trips out, that's times 2, basically, okay?
Right.
So there's a lot more, there's a lot higher ADT than what you suggest here, okay? And, we can go through chapter and verse if you like, but there are some real shortcomings to what has been done here. And like I say, that propagates through to what you asked the state for, because you said, gee, we're gonna have, this many trips, this kind of ADT, and the ADT that you're really gonna get based on your other numbers is really a lot higher.
I guess I don't understand that. Could you be more specific?
Could you also mention your qualifications?
Oh, yeah, I'm a registered professional engineer,
Yeah.
Transportation engineer. So, yeah. He
So
said that, I didn't.
So now I'm looking to you to,
Well, the thing is,
we
we can spend a lot of time here, or is there some other way that we can get this information to them? I mean,
And so when you were talking about our DOT permit application,
yeah. You said something, and I don't have it right, it's here somewhere, but you said a certain number. You said the ADT is 30 trips or 40 trips or whatever.
Right.
And it's really much higher than that.
and
They
and
quoted
what
it.
is the?
Based on how much concrete you are producing and the average amount of concrete in a truck, 9 yards, and so forth.
A truck is more than 9 yards, and a truck with aggregate is much larger than that coming in, but,
You mean an aggregate delivery truck?
yeah.
And
Much
which I don't
larger.
think you even mentioned, do you?
Yeah,
Okay, the aggregate delivery, okay. I'm talking about the concrete mixer being basically 9 yards. of
Yeah, it's
concrete.
it's 10 or 10 and a half, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so 10%.
Anyway, there's, so for example, you have on-site employees, 2 times 1.5 trips, and it's really, if you have 2 employees, that's 2 coming in, 2 going out, so that's 4. With employee drivers, if there's 5, that's 5 in, 5 out, that's 10, and so on and so forth. And that's how you come up with the ADT. So there's some issues here. And if you start compressing the trucks and the operations necessary to support the 20,000 cubic yard operation, you're compressing that over time, and so your peak hours and so forth are going to be even more. So, but I can put that. I mean, if I'm permitted to do that, I can put that in a memoranda or whatever. Is that a good thing or a bad thing or something I'm not allowed to do?
I mean, you can certainly communicate your questions or concerns through me.
Okay, oh, yeah, great.
And, I can't point to everything that's in our traffic or street design standards right now, but I do know that wherever trip generation is mentioned in the ordinance, it is then defined in the definitions section, and it talks about, provided by the ITE.
Well, unfortunately, ITE
or a
doesn't have
traffic
any trip
study.
generations for
This specific
Yeah.
use, and I don't know, I mean, that's where I am not an engineer, let alone an expert. I don't know if the different industrial use types in the ITE can be adapted to a specific.
hard.
So does that mean that it requires a specific
Oh,
study?
no, I don't have any trouble with the kind of the process that you went through here. I mean, it was like 3 of these, 2 of those, 4 of the other thing. I mean, I get that. It's just the number of trips that actually generates, and the rules that we have in terms of when a certain number of trips triggers something else. Okay?
So what you're saying is you believe that those trip generations are double what we're showing?
Yes, roughly. You know, so for example, for the 25,000 cubic yard thing, you had 34 and I had at least 61, as an example. And that, I guess that does count, because that, yeah, it counts the concrete deliveries, everything, yes.
So that definition of trip generation, estimate of the peak number of vehicle trip ends generated for a selected use or project used to estimate an ADT. It shall be as determined from 1, trip generation as published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, latest edition, or 2, specific traffic counts provided by an engineer. Is that a
Well, you're gonna
good
be-
definition?
you're gonna be- yeah, no, but the ITE trip generation materials don't really
Right.
apply to this use, okay? And, I mean,
If you
we could try to look at 3 or 4 different uses and say, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's the other thing.
So,
But, so for example, under the industrial use, there are no concrete plants or asphalt plants.
I think, it would be under the manufacturing section.
And likewise, it is not there.
Yeah.
But-
You'd have to use
Because I looked
the
at them
low,
all
you'd have
just
to use
today.
you'd have to use the lower end of the ITE because of this application.
What you did here in terms of the process and the approach is fine,
Yeah.
as long as you multiply it more or less by 2. And something about the compression of all the trips over April till November. You know, because I assume.
And is that what you would do? Is
Oh,
use
you do compress them, but that puts the ADT
high,
higher
yeah,
even than I did, right?
because you used a 12-month period.
I tried to replicate whatever you did. I didn't do any squishing back and forth.
So if we follow the trip generations as you calculated, you would use a 12-month period versus 8.
You know, the peak hours likely to be, the peak hours likely to be different, the peak hour numbers are likely to be different if you're looking at a 12-month period versus a 9-month period,
Yeah.
okay? Because some of those trips, I assume that some of those trips that would be occurring over the 9-month period would shift to a 12-month, shift somewhat to the 12-month scenario if you had operations throughout the year. Anyway, I think that, we can go back and forth a lot here, okay? But I can certainly send you an email with all this, well, them, and she can do with it what she plans, what she wants, in the next couple of days.
Okay, we would,
Well, Rick, I got a question. On the letter that they send to DOT, it says traffic generation is anticipated to average of 40 passenger car equivalents per day. Now, is that the correct terminology? I mean,
Passenger car equivalent is just like it says, it's like, okay, if you have 5 passenger cars, that's 5. If you have 4 passengers cars and a truck, okay, trucks count for anywhere between 3 and 5 passenger cars. So that, you have to take that into account also.
Let me just.
Just saying.
yeah, no, that's,
As we go on this.
So they use the right
This
terminology.
discussion right now has nothing to do really with completeness of plan.
That's right, because it is complete.
Yeah, because the
Okay, sorry.
information's there. Whether you guys agree with the adequacy of it has nothing to do with our approval.
thank you.
No, but we have to
Thank you.
get this
Just so you know.
on the table, because if it
Yeah.
came back like this, it would be
Yeah,
rejected.
well, no,
No, I appreciate that.
that's fine, it's just that, this will not affect our actions this evening, so you could not have to worry about that.
okay, Tom, in their fire suppression, they're recommending not to have a hydrant on site because there's a fire hydrant 600 feet away or some such manner.
Correct, and they're not, and the building that they're proposing is less than 12,000 square feet. So per the IBC and NFPA, it doesn't require sprinkling, so. And so then therefore, we also wouldn't require a hydrant.
Okay, so you're okay with that?
Yep.
I have a question about building height, okay? 65 feet is the number, right, for us under the zoning ordinance? And this thing has, the silo has a height of 63 feet, which is clearly less than 65. But then there's this stuff on the top, which is a dust collector with a railing around it and so forth. My question is, does the dust collector and all that stuff, does that count against the 65? Or is it like
Structure height.
it's like having an air conditioning unit on top of a building?
We have
where
a
that
definition.
height doesn't count.
Yeah, we have a definition for structure height, and it doesn't count.
Okay,
Top. Yeah.
dodge that one.
One other question on trucks coming in and out, or basically out, loaded trucks. Depending on which way you turn, if you turn left, I don't have a problem. If you turn right, you've got about 0.2 of a mile before you get to a 0.3 of a mile hill that's probably a 10% grade, maybe, close to it. And then another 1 mile of a slight incline. I'm just wondering what, if any, danger that's gonna propose to cars coming along behind. I seriously doubt a loaded cement truck's gonna get up ahead of steam going up that hill. And, you know, is that gonna propose a danger to, I mean, you're in a no passing zone, you know, the truck driver may get over, you know, travel in the shoulder a little bit, but, you know how impatient people get.
I think that's something that MDOT really should be responding to, right?
Well, they should.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think I mean, for my money, what you do is you say, here's this stuff, here's what kind of trucks are gonna be coming out of there, and what do y'all think? I mean, y'all being the MDOT.
How much distance did you say it was to the hill? 'Cause
I went out the other day, it's about 0.2 of a mile from the driveway to the base of the hill. And then the hill that's up, the real steep hill, is approximately 0.3 of a mile. And then it kind
Yeah.
of curves and then levels
We
off.
wouldn't see a problem with that, but I'm not.
Well, if a truck pulls on, it's starting from 0 speed, right?
Right.
Yeah,
And it's going up,
0.3
and it's going up a hill.
Yep.
And it's gonna be going up that hill very slowly for quite a ways. And any cars that are coming on the main line are gonna queue behind that truck and/or, you know, be upset. So, I honestly don't know what the solution to that is, but my guess is that at a minimum, you know, some signage or whatever about slow-moving vehicles or whatever, but, you know, that's up to the state to provide, to decide.
well, right, I mean, it's more of a state issue, but it's, you know, it's also.
Oh, no, I think it's a totally valid point, okay?
Yeah.
And again, that's where the passenger car equivalents come in, because the passenger car equivalents for a truck going up the hill are way higher than the passenger car equivalents for a truck on the flat.
Now, unfortunately, there's no passing lane there. That'd be a good place for the state to put one in, but they haven't.
They might have an incentive.
I think that's my questions for now.
Okay. Anyone else have, okay. This is a public hearing. Does anyone wish to speak? Yes, sir. Please come forward.
Thank you. My name is George Fields. I'm with Blue Hill Heritage Trust. We own 1,600 acres just south of Bucksport Road. About 300 feet from your driveway is our entranceway. My question, I did not see within the plan any noise generated numbers and specs.
Please address the board, please.
Okay. I did not see any noise specifications associated with a concrete batch plant. Is there any that would preclude the actual plant operating for, I think there was a 90 decibel limit for 30 minutes as the only figure that I saw in the noise ordinance for the town?
Noise ordinance, oddly enough, is not a planning board ordinance. But, Elena, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's not, yes, the noise ordinance isn't a planning board ordinance. I think you have some of the fun of enforcing it,
No.
maybe with
Police
the
department
police.
does.
Oh,
It's
it's
all
all
police.
police?
Mhm.
I thought there was a decibel meter in your office, but.
No, though I gave it to the police department.
Oh, good. So at least we have a noise ordinance. But you did have a condition of approval with regards to hours of operation on the previous plan approval on this property. I don't know if that was imposed because primarily of noise concerns. I would imagine so.
Basically because of the proximity to the people who live on Woodland Road.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose we haven't, if there's information provided about noise that's generated, I didn't notice it. So that's perhaps an unanswered,
Yes.
we don't know if it's an issue, right? So,
Well, you did have chief search the records to see if there had been any
yes.
noise complaints from people who live on Woodland Road since the gravel pit started.
And there have not been
And they
any.
said there has not.
Hmm. You've raised an interesting issue.
Okay,
Well, congratulations.
thank you. Would the applicant be able to generate some, I guess, literature, decibel levels for similar, similar features, whether it's gravel hauling or construction in the gravel pit, and/or compare that to the concrete batch mixing and trucks coming in and out?
We could ask that. Thank you.
Okay.
Have you further things for us?
I do. Second question is, I saw in the application that there was no requirement for a lighting ordinance because we are not in a business or technology area. Just because this is industrial, I know that the lighting section in the Universal Development Ordinance wants to promote dark sky initiatives. So I would be wondering if a condition, if the applicant is using any lighting during the evening times, if they could shield those lights in such a fashion to not create any issues with light emanating above the horizontal.
Thank you. Nothing like having ideas put in our heads. Anyhow, do you have figures on noise generated by concrete plants?
We do, we actually have figures of our own concrete plant. This one will be, concrete plants don't make a lot of noise, except for the rocks and stuff going up conveyors. We have like generators that are around 70, 75 decibels at the source. I mean, at rate, if you're standing rate in our concrete plant, you're probably only gonna see about 90 itself. The biggest noise maker for a concrete plant is actually the concrete truck itself. So it's when it's in full idle mixing, that's when you get the numbers, and then we're only about, it's about 97.
What are your normal hours of operation?
93?
At the truck.
93 at the
And
truck.
your normal, your anticipated hours of operation?
Typically, it's 6:30 to 4:30 for the concrete plant. That's a typical day. Yeah, and then, obviously the
Yeah.
darkness is,
Roughly, I'd say 6 to 5:30 is a normal day.
And are you proposing lighting?
well, I think we're required to, aren't we, Elena? I think that
You
was.
say you're proposing 2 lights, but that you don't want to provide a lighting plan. So if you're proposing lighting with a site plan, you need to meet the lighting standards. So I don't know what you're proposing.
Do the current codes require lighting? They require a lighting plan, right? That's what you had
We have
said to
stand-
me, I need a lighting plan. So what is the code on providing lights or lighting plan? Because we're trying to respond to the Ellsworth code.
Right, so there are standards for the lighting, for example, in a parking lot. You don't necessarily have a parking lot, but you've mentioned not being applicable, but you are proposing lighting. So I think we need to understand what lighting is proposed, or you ask for a waiver.
So less is good.
What lighting?
It depends.
Yeah,
I mean, lighting is provided for safety
Right.
in some instances. I think you mentioned cameras somewhere.
Right.
You mentioned a light on the plant itself. I don't know how high up that is. I don't know if it's lighting building entrances, parking lots.
Yeah, I get it. To respond to that, the only lighting that we would propose would be at the plant itself, just for safety if it's dark, if customers come.
And I mean, possibly one by the truck parking. And we heard her comments last time and talked to our electrician about getting a lighting plan.
Okay.
So
We're working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it,
Would the lights be on all night?
Probably for safety and
Yeah.
security. I would
As long
say
as they're
so.
shielded.
But
Yeah.
you're not allowed to pollute past the property line, so
Yeah, and
it
there's a
shouldn't be
certain
an
amount
issue.
of,
I could see where someone would be worried if it was at the
Top
top of the silo or something.
with a big
which
floodlight.
It
yeah,
doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
but,
So just to respond to the public, we're certainly cognizant of that and want to work with them to make sure that's an environment that we can provide.
Right.
One of the things I didn't mention is with, between the two properties, there's about 200 feet of wetland area. And that wetland will, obviously is not going to be disturbed. We did everything we could to not disturb wetland. And there will be an ample amount of buffer in between the properties.
I think part of the concern is that the light be directed down.
Right.
No problem with that.
Yep.
Would you have any problem working together with the Blue Hill Trust?
Not at all.
Okay, so that's entirely outside of our process, but,
Yeah.
you know, never hurts to work with neighbors.
Absolutely.
All righty, where are we here, folks?
That was public hearing.
Are you a public?
I'm whatever you wish to call me.
I think you're a staff. I think you're a staff.
We can't, we bring televised,
Water
John.
guy.
I think he's a staff. But go ahead.
I'm staff as well. But yeah, in the manner of, as you said, more cooperation there. The only items we spoke about in the TRT meeting that I remember putting some input to was the actual ingredients in their process. Being a heavy industry, it's a little bit different than a housing development. It has some inputs and it has some products. We know the product, you explained how to make the product very well. The inputs into it are important simply because of what they are and the quantities that are there. They have additives, which can be several different brands, several different products, depending on what their mix desires to be. That can be proprietary. They have the result. They have the ability to control that for each batch. One way to keep this heavy industry from something going south as to what happened with the Portland Bangor Waste Oil Company, which resulted in, according to the DEP, 100 years of pollution on their site in Ellsworth, is a SBCC plan which talks about any kind of petroleum or other chemicals stored on site. It's basically a spill and countermeasures plan. That may not be necessary for the size of their operation, but it may, and the planning board might wish to discuss that with them once you become more familiar with an SBCC plan and what it is done and who makes it. And the other issue is the actual Portland cement used to make concrete. Very useful compound. The pH of fresh concrete is from 12 to 13. You have a lot of wash water that's used to clean your equipment when you're making this stuff, because you certainly don't want it to adhere to your equipment. So that wastewater is held in pools, and I will let the applicant explain, where that's handled and whatnot, if you wish. But that product is hazardous by definition, it's corrosive, it's about 12.5. And because of that, the planning board may consider ways that it can be monitored so that that doesn't escape into the biofilters that they described in their plan. Because the biota in a biofilter wouldn't be very happy with 12.5 water going into it. So it's something you might want to consider in the future. It's early on now, and it's a great time to talk about those kind of things, to make sure everyone's on the same page about how to keep anything on site from getting off site, and countermeasures that would ameliorate that to happen.
Do you want me to respond to that?
Yes.
Or do you want me to be quiet? So a couple things, absolutely SPCC plans, we believe in, we have, we have all kinds of them. And it's, this site might not definitely trigger SPCC, but we will be based on the volumes that we have and the type of material we have. Okay, we do have, we are proposing 5 tanks of additives. Some are very small, like 500-gallon tanks. We are proposing a spill counter control measures by encompassing 110% plus capacity for stormwater around those tanks. And how we do that, we have a storm drain, for lack of better words, but a graded inlet in the area of the tanks. It's all surrounded by a concrete berm, asphalt area, and we have an underground septic tank that will catch that during the temporary phase or the seasonal phase of this project. So that septic tank will catch it. And the reason why the septic tank is most important is because there's stormwater going around the tank. So we'll have a 2,000-gallon tank that will be in this area. It will catch water, and it will pump into what you were showing on the plan as a wash water recycle. Now, most washing of concrete is not done on the manufacturing site. Most washing of the concrete is done on the project. What you'll find there, Larry, what's the capacity of the tanks that the concrete truck takes with them?
200 to 300 gallons.
The concrete truck itself takes 200 to 300 gallons of water with them. And the purpose of that is to clean, for the contractor on site, clean all his rakes, his shovels, his vibrator, all of those things, and then clean up the site, wash down the chutes of the truck, and that's done on site. And you can't come home with that, or you're just gonna be all dried up. So and there's where a lot of the water usage is in itself. So anyway, he washes out, but what he does is, when he comes in, he may wash out his drum, spray it down, make sure it's ready to fill up again with concrete. And also when he leaves the site, he may wash down his, on the top of those concrete tanks, there's a chute. You want the chute clean. So it's minimal water in comparison to what washing is. But we would expect about 5% of our water usage, about 5,000 gallons a year, to use for wash water. Do I have that number right? 50,000?
Yeah.
Sounds like a
Yeah, it'd be
traffic study now, doesn't it?
A little bit more than that.
50,000, yeah, 50,000 gallons.
On site.
Yes,
Yeah.
on site. So here, you'll see where the 2 silos are. One of the things that's kind of confusing, unless you've looked at the actual concrete plant drawings that are in your packet. There's some drawings that show the silo, and show the process. But under this silo right here, truck comes in, he's parked over here, he comes over here, comes in and drives underneath this silo. That silo is elevated, and the truck goes under it. That cement that's coming down goes directly into the tank. And so the wash water from here, he pulls out and he rinses off. And this concrete area, which I'm showing in purple here, because figured somebody would ask the question. And it drains to what is labeled wash water recycle. And the wash water recycle the water, and DEP regulates us as well. They don't want the pH. We don't want pH. We don't want the wetlands all of a sudden dying because there's a high pH level. So that wash water goes through the system. It's a circular system with weirs, and then it's caught and then it's pumped back. All the fines and the dirt and the rocks and the cement that's left from it is scooped up with a loader occasionally and moved to a stockpile when we recycle that. And that's the way it's done these days. Back in the old days, we just dumped it in the ground. But for pH, one of the things that you'll see in here is, so the pH is being contained. Is the pH high? Yeah, what you'll find in the effluent is more like a 7.5 to 10, because it's been diluted. But he's right, the cement itself, I'll leave the site, you're gonna be around flow. So you're seeing an overflow pond here. It's not intended to be used. It's only intended as an emergency spillway. So that if that gets too high, and it's, because it is open, it's made so your loader can drive right down in, pick up the materials, take them when they're dry. So in that case, overflow pond, and we like having water. We like to reuse water. We like to use water for a lot of different things, but for this, before I go there, from the recycler, it pumps back around, that water truck comes out, he's got a spigot there, that water's recycled, he uses that for wash water again. After it evaporates a little bit, add a little bit of water to it to keep the system going. If in the event there's, boys are boys, and something happens, and then it overflows, if there isn't, he's looking over his glasses at me, I don't know if you like that, overflow the pond. And if, in the pond, before we can discharge, we can check that pH, and we use common chemicals that you use for your pool to reduce the pH. Same thing with swimming. To answer your question on stormwater discharge, absolutely no stormwater tank is going to contain any type of concrete discharge, concrete water discharge. It's just not allowed, and it's just not good, and we don't want to do it either. That's just the way that it's done these days.
Yeah.
These
If
little
I could-
biocells,
If I could add,
yeah.
I just wanted to say that there's a lot of concrete plants around that are 30, 40 years old, and they're not doing
Any of
anything
that.
like this. And we talked to a few of our peers and people that have put in systems after to try to design something that would work. And that concrete wash water recycle is completely concrete, so it's self-contained. The truck, as it loads, that pad will wash down into that containment area and have a speed bump, if you will, along that pad. Everything can be washed into that area. So when they pull ahead, they wash their truck down, all that material is contained. When they come back, and that system weirs it through, so the water's clean in the third weir. They come back, they fill their truck, and they only wash the truck out maybe a couple times a day, or maybe once at the end, make sure everything's clean inside. Other than that, they keep the drum spinning, and so nothing hardens up in it. But when they wash out, they add about 250 gallons, and they will go over to the concrete washout area after filling with water from the recycle and discharge it back into that area. And that area will hold a significant amount of water. Our design has about 20,000 gallons of capacity, and you're only putting 250 per truck. Basically, you'll probably be adding water as it evaporates, and that should stay self-contained. We have that overflow, get a 100-year storm, we've got enough capacity to catch storm water if it happens to go over. I think we have enough in the system itself, but just in case, so it never goes over, and our policy would be to, if we have a discharge into the overflow, check the pH, adjust the pH so that there's no infiltration of high pH water. So that's kind of the idea.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, these are all good things.
Thank you. And we agree on the biocell treatment, we don't want any material. Stormwater going into our biocells, that would contain any type of concrete.
Does anyone else wish to comment on this application? Any further comments, sir? In that case, I shall close the public hearing. And
I've got a couple other questions.
Sure.
On the Mcmullen site, we did put a couple of conditions on that. I would most likely include those on your site. I think you already said that there's gonna be no blasting on the site. There's one that really doesn't apply to you. It was no public use of recreational vehicles on the property. I don't think you're gonna have to worry about that. We were
That
more
site's
concerned
not
about
big
somebody
enough
getting in
to-
a gravel pit. But one did deal with the hours of operation. It was to be Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I would suspect that I would push for that, no more than that. If we're gonna limit the hours of a gravel pit.
What was the basis for limiting the operation of the gravel pit?
The proximity to about 20 houses.
And you didn't have any complaints?
Not that.
So I'd ask the board that just follow the code for operation. I mean, we'll meet your noise standard, your ordinance, we will meet it. The noise levels of what we're doing are not going to be over 90 decibels at the property line at all.
I mean, that's
Or,
that's
you
a
know,
decision the board
it's-
makes.
It's a concrete.
Yeah,
Not just me.
it's a little restrictive for our business. I don't think we would need to operate much outside of that. But there's definitely plants that are running at a lot more hours than that. We don't typically.
Well, what hours of operation are you looking for?
We like to operate 6 to 5:30. You know, you could have a truck that ends out on a job site and comes back a little bit later. So, you know, that can happen.
It is an
Couldn't really
industrial
say-
zone site.
Yeah, I couldn't really say the latest. I mean, we're not out at night like some of the other plants are doing. But, you know, they've got the ordinance with 6 to 10 for loading and unloading commercial vehicles. I mean, I'd like to stay with that. Would I be out there at 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock? Probably. I wouldn't say so, but our normal operating hours are 6 to 5:30. We do work Saturdays, but it's usually a half a day. We work till maybe noon time. That's how we've done business over the years. We'd like to continue doing that. Like, sometimes a truck can get held up on a job. Say you went out and 4:30, 5 o'clock, and they board until, 6, and he gets back and he washes out. So that's my concern, that we're able to do something a little bit later.
But you wouldn't be loading trucks at that point.
No, I'd come back and we'd have to wash out.
And I assume that's a much quieter operation than.
Yeah, it's still, that truck still has to rev up to discharge. That will still happen. But it's not, I've checked our noise, and it's really not too bad. We have a significant buffer from the houses, and the road and the trees that we have are surrounding us are about 40 feet tall, and it's a fair distance. when I go out in my yard with the noise meter, I mean, it's averaging about 65, which isn't real crazy. You know, right at the source should be 90. And while he's in full loading, you go back 200-300 feet, you're down to in 60s. So
Okay.
that's my
Okay.
spiel.
I would ask Elena, in the TRT notes, there's discussion that Mcmullen is not or was not in compliance with his conditions of approval, or, I mean, how does that stand? Because if I read the ordinance correctly, if he's out of compliance, if he hasn't met all his conditions, this project cannot get approval.
Right, so there's a few things that we're still working on to figure out. Well, maybe one that's not really figured out at staff level is the status of one of his permits with DEP, because this access way in, I think, January of 2020, before you all granted a site plan approval for the gravel pit, there was an after-the-fact NERPA permit for wetland filling that required him to narrow the road. I don't know if it's at that section or if it's beyond what's shown on here. So that DEP was looking for him to remove material from that road within 6 months. I don't know where that stands. Laurie reached out to DEP to check on that, but we haven't really heard back. So that's, you know, a condition of a permit that's not ours, but something that is outstanding and of concern and may impact other things, right? So there's that. There were some conditions with the entrance permit, which I would think that this would be revised with DOT. There's a lot pending there. So that's not so much of a concern. I think the biggest thing to do with your conditions of approval would be, there was concern at the time of that approval of his access road going over property lines and the need for either a deeded right-of-way or some sort of easement. And that hasn't been provided. What has been provided is a new October 2020, I think, survey that does show like a potential boundary line agreement, but it hasn't been recorded that way. So that's still a little up in the air to me.
Well, doesn't that have to be fixed before this project can get approval?
I would think so.
Can I make comments, or is this a good time or bad time?
The public hearing was closed, but,
I'm the landowner.
excuse me?
I'm the landowner that you're discussing, property owner.
He's part of our team.
So he's, your part, okay, so, sure.
Yeah, so,
Make sure he's on the microphone somewhere.
in regards to, the DEP permit for my road, I had hired a wetland specialist to mark out and delineate the wetlands. Met with John Cullen. He advised me to get a wetland specialist in. So they marked it out, and I built my road to the specifications of that wetland study. John Cullen's been on the property numerous times. So as far as I'm concerned, everything has been met. He's been on there this summer. So we have shrunk the road in spots, and we've made the road larger in spots where we can. But as far as I know, we've met all the standards for that permit. As far as the easement goes, when we had talked, the logging road had gone over a section. There was a funny shape on the assessor's map, and that's where Steve Salisbury got the plot plan from. And at the time, the neighbors agreed that they would give me an easement. Then when it kind of came down to it, they weren't really on board with it. So I went to Steve and I said, we need to get this surveyed, because there wasn't any pins on the ground. So I had Steve survey the property, and it took him a very long time to find records and all that. He talked to a bunch of people, but what he came up with was the plan that I had just provided a few weeks ago. And there was a notation on there because the neighbor and myself went and actually pounded the property pin in next to the fire hydrant right at the entrance of the road because we couldn't find the old one. So we both agreed that that corner pin was where Steve was gonna mark his lines from. But finally when Steve finished the survey, we realized that my road does not go over the neighbor's land anymore. So there was no need to get an easement. So I hadn't followed up with the city because there really wasn't an issue. They hadn't reached out to me, so, but we had just kind of settled that a few weeks ago. So as far as I know, there shouldn't be any conditions that haven't been fully met.
May I suggest filing a copy of that survey with the assessor's office?
Okay.
We have
So
one.
that, you have it?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and wouldn't it need to be, I think it need to be recorded at the registry if they've agreed to a boundary line.
Well, but the survey shows that the road never was on there.
If they agree where the boundary is.
That was the corner pin in that line never changed on the plan. There was just this funny shape that was kind of protruded into the property and the road went through it. And that line between myself and the Canes never moved, but actually the shape of that space changed after he did some research and found where that went. So ultimately, what we agreed upon was the line that was always there. And he just, we looked around and couldn't find a pin, so we just pounded one in where he said it should go, and I didn't have any issues with that, so. So I don't think that line necessarily has moved. It was just that shape that was in ways, which is past the lot that Hughes Brothers potentially building on.
It's a little confusing, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't know what has to go from you or Steve to
Yeah.
the city staff.
As far as I'm concerned, I can just call Steve and have him deal directly with the city. I mean, it had nothing to do, I mean, I hired Steve, but beyond that, it was kind of out of my control.
I think a statement that drawn from Steve would be a good thing.
Well, I think when there's ambiguity about a property line and people figure out where it should be, and it's, they're not figuring it out from deeds, or they come to an agreement, a boundary line agreement, and that has to be formalized at some point, not just with the assessing office, but will a future owner, neighbor feel the same way? Well, they're gonna have to if it's recorded, right? So.
Right, I mean, is there something in writing that the Canes agree with Steve's survey, or?
Steve recommended that I do one. I hadn't done that with them, because, I mean, we went out there and we pounded it in the ground, so why wouldn't we agree that that was it? So, I mean, I can do that.
I mean, I think that would be
Yeah.
smart.
We'll
I think that would be advisable, because
But ultimately,
somebody's opinion can change.
Right, but ultimately, the location of that pin doesn't have anything to do with the shape of where the road was going and the easement that you were requesting. So ultimately, it's not the same area on the property that.
But has there been discussion with the Canes on the strange shape of that?
They, basically it's a wetland, and they really weren't concerned about it at all. It's unusable, and they don't want to spend the time or the effort to hire another surveyor to look into it. So, I mean, it would be one professional's, opinion against another's, so.
I guess,
I would just
maybe
comment-
ask Ed Bear's opinion?
Yeah, we can.
I would just
clean it
comment
up.
that it would certainly be in protect your interest to have something from the neighbors that they're not.
Yeah, I'm sure I can get Steve to, get me, some form. I can go get Dave to sign it, the next day or two.
I mean, I think it would be in your best interest.
Yeah, independent of the project.
Yeah.
just so that, you know, in the future, if that property, if you should sell the property or somebody, or a family inherits it, it's all there, it won't be an issue then in the future.
Well, that easement has to, I mean, it sounds like he's
Yeah.
fixed it, but that has to be fixed for in order to him to sell the 9 acres to
Yeah.
use.
Yeah, but it's not strictly a planning board issue.
Well, it is from their point of view.
Yes.
Just to resolve the concerns of the previous
It
plan.
doesn't affect our saying that this is a complete application, for example.
No.
Okay.
It
I'm
does,
just
it does
concerned.
affect a final approval.
Well, that may be, but I'm just trying to get us through tonight.
Where is this dispute? Can you tell me, just so I'm familiar?
I can show you, I don't know if I have an old, survey, I have some new surveys, but,
You should be able to see it on there.
yeah, let's see. So this would be the entrance, right down here, there's a fire hydrant. We pretty much pounded a pin in the ground right next to the fire hydrant. This is the odd shape right here that protrudes into my lot. And then this is the access road here. And the original shape of that made it appear that I had about 150, 200 feet of the logging road that was on the Kane's land. But then after Steve did the survey, the line didn't go across the property.
So it doesn't affect the
It-
9
it-
acres?
It's not even near, it's not a part of your
And it's not
parcel
part of the
land.
adjacent road to the
And
9 acres?
No, it's not. It's, what I did was, I had Steve, I think I've ended up with 125 feet of land at the narrowest point to keep in my possession for when things get split off, just so I have access to my own property. Yeah, I can easily get something if you need it. I just, like I said, I hadn't pursued it because after he did the survey, that, you know, it was on my property anyway, so I didn't obviously need an easement at that point.
If you make the planner happy, we'll be happy.
Deal.
And then I guess, another question for staff is, on the checklist, as in the previous application, there's a lot of incompletes.
Yeah.
How critical are these incompletes?
Well, so some more than others. So one of, as, when we were discussing traffic, traffic trip generation, we arrived at the conclusion that is provided, right? Not necessarily the time to discuss whether it meets criteria and standards. However, the number of ADT has an effect on what type of access way this is. I think it's going to end up being a site road, most likely, unless the numbers are much bigger than what's been provided. So if it's a site road, then one of the submission requirements is how are you meeting the standards of a site road, your plan, profile, et cetera. So that is dependent on the other. I have some concerns about the stormwater, one of which is kind of again related to this lot being part of a larger lot until it is divided. When we talk about the flooding standard and where the calculation is done for whether that standard is met or not, it's described as being at a point off of the property
If I could
they
just
intend to buy.
interrupt, do we have a stormwater plan here?
Yeah.
Whether it's adequate or not is not a matter for preliminary.
Suppose.
This is a matter for final.
I suppose.
Just so that everyone knows that it could be an issue is the good thing.
Yeah.
But right now, we can't base our finding of completeness on the adequacy of the plan, just that it is.
Helene, I've had some discussions with the fellow who did the stormwater calculations, and I'm gonna ask that they give you a call directly to try to resolve that. I don't think
But that's not an issue for tonight.
Absolutely.
Good idea. Yeah, I mean, it gets tough to apply that concept to everything.
Yes, but again, on the traffic and street design submissions, I mean, it's there. It may, whether it's any good
Yeah,
is not an issue for this evening.
yeah.
It's been brought up and the applicant is aware of concerns, but that's for a final. And we can't let this interfere with completeness. It has a potential to kill everything later, but it's not this evening's issue.
Yeah. I think, I totally understand
Yeah.
where you're coming from, I do. And I didn't provide you a recommendation either way. But it does get to be a lot to keep track of next month, and a lot that any interested abutters, parties, members of the public don't have available for another month, so. And yourselves.
Yeah.
You don't have time to review something against the criteria and standards if it.
There's another TRT meeting, right?
Yes.
But
So,
again,
if you have questions, we will respond to everything by
but
that
again,
meeting.
for tonight, there is information. Again, whether the information is adequate has no bearing on what we do this evening, because we're not approving anything.
But if the information is so inadequate,
That doesn't.
Then it would be
Yeah.
incomplete, is what he's saying.
And it's,
I guess we'll disagree on that one.
yeah. I don't wish to give an applicant grounds to appeal what we do this evening.
We don't feel that there's a lot of work
Yeah.
to respond to these, and I know that does seem like a lot of work. We have a site plan that's ready to come, but a number of these are adding sizes to culverts.
It's one of the reasons that we have the preliminary and the.
Yeah,
If
so that-
this was all one thing,
It's already, that's already, we'll look at the traffic, and then we'll make sure that our consultant on the stormwater talks to Elena and to a point that we can respond to that by the time of that TRT meeting.
So,
And we'll look at the traffic, and then if that's what it is, I mean, it's not a deal breaker for us. If that's what it is, that's what it is. I mean, error, we'll want to correct that, and we'll look at those road standards. That's really not a hard piece. It's just costly piece.
as I used to say years ago, we're not Bar Harbor. Which used to be, I understand, a horror show.
so is there anything that's absolutely missing from this?
That's the question. we
That
need to-
keeps us from approving it?
Yes, that, from finding it complete.
That was a question,
Yeah.
for which I hope there's an answer.
Okay, we don't have the response letter from critical national areas or National Register.
I have addressed it, and
Yeah.
I did address that there are no species there
Right.
based on our research, and we are just waiting for those letters.
I don't see that. To me, that's not.
That's probably pretty
terrible
common
thing.
here.
Well, we certainly
Yes.
let other ones go that haven't
Yeah,
had those letters.
because,
so.
because if it's not there on the final, then it's a problem.
Right.
We've just heard that the question of easements is not an issue. If we accept that, then that is not an issue for completeness. I don't think there will be an owners association, will there?
Not a very
I don't
big
I don't know if you can have an association of two, but
Well, two people can't associate.
they can associate. I think that we need some assurances that the two parties have thought about all the different responsibilities that they're going to share and how that they will address those long-term. That is a requirement of the ordinance. Access, utilities, stormwater in this
Yeah.
case, perhaps signage, that's not certain.
I think what you'll find in the application too is that how we address that is through our easement, and our right of way, and that's,
Yeah.
pretty common on our end. And if we need us to provide more, but our draft easement now includes, the ability for Hughes Brothers to maintain the utilities, install and maintain, and, maintain the roadway, install the roadway, install signage, and conduct
Yeah,
erosion and
that big-
sedimentation
that-
control. It's pretty common for the easements, and that's how we're hoping
The big,
to respond
yeah,
to
the big
that.
LED sign, that
Yeah.
could be a problem.
Yeah, no LED sign. No LED sign.
The road
And
is,
we know that. We wouldn't do that to the.
and the road is gonna be completely on your property, right, Mr.
Yes.
Mcmullen?
Yep.
Yeah. And if that's okay with, and I'll talk to Elena again, and if that's okay with her, then that's what we'll skip that submitted, and if not, we'll develop a maintenance agreement, whatever it is that you're looking for between the two of us. We'll work together.
Sounds good to me. After all, I don't have to extend myself for this. I can stay retired. So, planning board, are we ready for a motion?
Rick's turn.
Oh, okay.
No. There is a pecking order that has been defined here.
No.
And Mr. Ballard makes the motion, and I second it.
No. But think of it as I practice.
I don't know. Practice for what? Okay, so I make the motion that the preliminary plan for a major use site development entitled Hughes Brothers concrete plant for Hughes Brothers Inc. is complete. And all the rest of that stuff. Well, she could copy that, I mean, no,
I'll second that.
there you go, see?
All right. Molly, do you have something, any discussion here? It's been moved and seconded.
Not at this time.
All in favor of completeness, please.
Thank you.
Well, now your
Look forward to
biggest,
seeing you again.
now
Thank
you
for-
have to go all the way
No,
back.
you don't, but that's okay.
And now you have
We
to
get a
go
lot of
all the
that.
way back north, home.
No, I live in Hamden.
Well, it's, you know, it's a little
Motion
trick.
to adjourn, sir.
Hold it, we're not finished the agenda, remember?
But there's more?
Oh, yeah, let's see.
Larry's already
There
given
were-
it. We have
Oh,
a
staff
picture?
comments. Comments. Does the staff wish to comment?
Oh, staff comments, my goodness.
No, you don't have to,
No, I
but
suppose I
I don't want you
don't.
to feel bubbled up.
More than I already do, goodness. No, nothing earth-shattering at this time.
Thomas, you can't just.
We do
leave it.
have, I took it off the agenda to save space, but we do have some Mylars to sign.
We have Mylars.
You need a box in your house.
It's not too bad. So if we could,
Do you have the proper pens at least?
yes. Not purple.
Okay, thank you folks for coming.
And I'll get my concerns to her with the next day or so, and she'll be in touch.
Yeah, and then she can send, then you two can send nasty emails back and forth.
Why?
Oh, I'll be the in-between for that.
Exactly, the buffer.
So fun.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn as soon as the Mylars are signed?
Well,
and
next-
ordered? Okay, all in favor? Yeah, it's not
Well,
in favor.
we still need
So-
to adjourn.
Okay, so.
Oh, no, wait, we made a motion
Did you
to adjourn.
adjourn?
After the Mylars are signed,
Okay.
we will be adjourned.
Um,
It's a fudge that works very well.
so,
These very minutes.
if you're,
of this meeting.
so